The ambiguity trap. The ambiguity trap is one of the most unsettling psychological tricks because it does not attack the mind directly. It surrounds the mind with unanswered questions. At its core, it is the act of giving someone a vague statement, unclear warning, or unfinished hint that makes them feel something is wrong without telling them exactly what it is. The person is left standing in emotional darkness, trying to guess what they did, who is talking, or what danger is coming. This is why ambiguity can feel more disturbing than a direct accusation. A clear accusation gives the brain something to defend against, but a sentence like, "You should know what you did," or "People are beginning to notice," creates pressure without evidence. The mind starts searching for hidden meaning. It replays old conversations, small mistakes, awkward moments, and private fears, trying to solve a puzzle that may not even exist. The creepy power of the ambiguity trap is that it makes the victim punish themselves. They become careful, anxious, apologetic, and emotionally dependent on the person who created the confusion. Instead of demanding clarity, they may chase approval, hoping the silence will end. Manipulators use this trick because uncertainty gives them control without responsibility. They can deny everything later and say, "I never accused you." Yet the damage has already started inside the other person's mind. What makes this trick truly dark is how quietly it works. No shouting, no proof, no clear threat. Just a few vague words placed in the right emotional moment can make someone feel guilty, watched, and unsafe, even when nothing wrong has actually happened. The delayed warmth trick. The delayed warmth trick is one of the most emotionally confusing psychological patterns because it gives kindness late, not freely. At its core, it is the act of withholding warmth, attention, or approval until the other person has already started feeling uncertain. Then, suddenly, a smile appears, a message arrives, a compliment is given. Because warmth comes after discomfort, it feels stronger than kindness. This trick works because the human mind is sensitive to emotional relief. When someone first makes you feel ignored, unsure, or slightly rejected, your nervous system begins searching for safety. You wonder if you said something wrong. You replay your last message. You become alert to every small change in tone. Then, when the person finally becomes warm again, the relief can feel almost addictive. The darker side of delayed warmth is that it trains people to crave approval from the person who keeps removing it. Instead of noticing the pattern, they focus on winning back the good version of that person. They may become more careful, more available, more apologetic, or more eager to please. Manipulators use this because inconsistent kindness creates emotional dependence. If someone is always kind, you relax. If someone is always cold, you leave. But when warmth appears only after uncertainty, the mind starts chasing it like a reward. What makes the delayed warmth trick creepy is that the affection may not be real connection. It can become a leash made of timing. The person does not need to threaten you. They only need to make kindness feel scarce, and suddenly their attention begins to feel like something you must earn. The confusion loop. The confusion loop is one of the most mentally draining psychological tricks because it traps a person inside uncertainty that keeps repeating. At its core, it is the act of creating unclear explanations, mixed signals, changing stories, or emotional contradictions until the other person no longer trusts their judgment. Instead of walking away with clarity, they keep returning to the same question. What just happened? This trick works because the human mind tries to complete unfinished patterns. When someone says one thing today and another tomorrow, acts warm in one moment and distant in the next, or gives an explanation that almost makes sense but still feels wrong, the brain keeps searching for order. The person begins replaying conversations, comparing details, and trying to make the pieces fit. The darker side of the confusion loop is that it shifts attention away from the manipulator's behavior and onto the victim's own doubt. The person may start asking, "Am I overreacting? Did I misunderstand? Maybe I am the problem." This is where the trap becomes powerful, because confusion can make people easier to influence than fear. Manipulators rely on this because a confused person is less likely to confront clearly. They may accept weak explanations, tolerate repeated disrespect, or stay in situations they would have left if everything were obvious. What makes the confusion loop creepy is that it does not always feel like control at first. It can feel like trying to understand someone complicated. But over time, the mind becomes tired, the emotions become tangled, and clarity starts feeling like something only the other person can give. The half-truth anchor. The half-truth anchor is one of the most dangerous psychological tricks because it hides deception inside something that sounds real. At its core, it is the act of giving someone a piece of truth, then attaching a false meaning to it. Because part of the statement is accurate, the whole thing begins to feel believable, even when the conclusion is twisted. This trick works because the mind naturally relaxes when it recognizes truth. If someone says something you know is correct, your defenses drop for a moment. Then they add another claim beside it. And because both ideas are connected in the same sentence, your brain may start treating them as equally trustworthy. The truth becomes the anchor, and the lie quietly attaches itself to it. The darker side of the half-truth anchor is that it can make people doubt their own memory. A manipulator may say, "Yes, I was upset, but only because you embarrassed me." The first part may be true. They were upset, but the second part shifts blame and creates guilt. Suddenly, the victim is no longer focused on the behavior. They are defending themselves against the false meaning attached to it. This trick is powerful because it feels harder to challenge than a complete lie. If you reject it, the person can point to the true part and say, "So you are denying that happened." This makes the victim feel trapped between admitting reality and accepting distortion. What makes the half-truth anchor creepy is how quietly it rewrites emotional history. One small truth can become a hook, and once the mind grabs it, the lie begins to sink deeper. The false familiarity effect. The false familiarity effect is one of the most unsettling psychological tricks because it makes a stranger feel closer than they really are. At its core, it is the act of creating an artificial sense of connection by copying someone's interests, language, habits, values, or emotional wounds until they begin to feel strangely understood. The person does not build trust slowly. They manufacture it quickly. This trick works because humans are naturally drawn to people who feel familiar. When someone says, "I am exactly like that too," or "I have always felt the same way," the mind lowers its guard. Similarity feels safe. It makes the other person seem less like a stranger and more like someone who belongs in your private world. The darker side of the false familiarity effect is that it can bypass caution. A manipulator may learn small details about someone, then reflect them back in a way that feels personal. They may pretend to share the same past, the same fears, the same dreams, or the same dislikes. The victim starts thinking, "This person gets me," even though the connection may be carefully performed. This trick becomes powerful because loneliness makes familiarity feel like rescue. When someone appears to understand the parts of you that others ignored, you may reveal more, trust faster, and question less. What makes the false familiarity effect creepy is that the closeness may not be real. It can be a costume made from your own personality. The person studies what makes you feel seen, then wears it back to you until their presence feels like destiny instead of strategy. The emotional debt trick. The emotional debt trick is one of the most uncomfortable psychological tricks because it turns kindness into a silent contract. At its core, it is the act of doing something helpful, generous, or emotionally supportive, then making the other person feel they now owe loyalty, attention, forgiveness, or obedience in return. What looked like care slowly becomes pressure. This trick works because human beings are wired to respond to favors. When someone helps us, listens to us, protects us, or shows up during a hard moment, we naturally feel grateful. That gratitude is healthy when the kindness is genuine, but when it is used as leverage, gratitude becomes a chain. The person may feel guilty for saying no, setting boundaries, or questioning the one who once helped them. The darker side of the emotional debt trick is that it can make people stay in situations that hurt them. A manipulator may remind them of past sacrifices, old favors, private support, or emotional rescue. They may say, "After everything I did for you," not to express pain, but to make freedom feel selfish. This trick becomes powerful because it attacks a person's conscience. The victim may begin to confuse appreciation with obligation. They may tolerate disrespect because they remember the good moments. They may silence their discomfort because leaving feels like betrayal. What makes the emotional debt trick creepy is that it hides control inside kindness. The gift is not always a gift. The comfort is not always comfort. Sometimes what felt like rescue was only the beginning of a debt someone planned to collect later. The selective memory trick. The selective memory trick is one of the most disturbing psychological tricks because it makes the past feel unstable. At its core, it is the act of remembering only the parts of an event that benefit one person while ignoring, minimizing, or denying the parts that expose their behavior. The conversation does not disappear completely, it gets edited. This trick works because memory is emotional, not perfect. When someone speaks with confidence about what happened, the other person may begin to question their own version. A manipulator may remember the insult they received, but forget the insult they gave first. They may remember your reaction, but erase the pressure that caused it. They may remember their kindness, but forget the control attached to it. The darker side of the selective memory trick is that it forces the victim into constant defense. Instead of discussing the full truth, they are pulled into proving details, correcting timelines, and explaining context. Over time, this becomes exhausting. The person may start giving up, not because the manipulator is right, but because fighting for reality becomes too tiring. This trick becomes powerful because it turns memory into a weapon. The manipulator does not need to deny everything. They only need to choose what counts. By highlighting one part and burying another, they can make themselves look innocent and the other person look unstable. What makes the selective memory trick creepy is how quietly it rewrites emotional history. The victim may know something is missing, but still struggle to prove it. Little by little, they stop trusting their own memory and start accepting the version that hurts them less to argue against. The controlled silence effect. The controlled silence effect is one of the most painful psychological tricks because it uses absence as pressure. At its core, it is the act of becoming silent on purpose, not to calm down or reflect, but to make another person feel anxious, guilty, rejected, or desperate for a response. The silence becomes a message, even though no words are spoken. This trick works because humans are wired to seek connection. When someone suddenly stops replying, avoids eye contact, withdraws affection, or refuses to explain what is wrong, the other person's mind starts filling the empty space. They wonder what they did. They replay conversations. They search for hidden mistakes. The silence begins to feel louder than an argument. The darker side of the controlled silence effect is that it can make people chase clarity from the same person who is withholding it. Instead of focusing on whether the silence is fair, they focus on ending it. They may apologize too quickly, soften their boundaries, or accept blame just to restore emotional contact. This trick becomes powerful because silence can look harmless from the outside. The manipulator can say, "I just needed space," even when the real purpose was punishment. That makes the victim feel confused for being hurt by something that seems invisible. What makes the controlled silence effect creepy is how deeply it can unsettle someone without leaving evidence. No insults are spoken, no threats are made, no obvious attack happens. Yet the person on the receiving end can feel abandoned, watched, and emotionally trapped, waiting for one message, one glance, or one small sign that they are safe again. The unfinished sentence trick. The unfinished sentence trick is one of the most disturbing psychological tricks because it lets the listener create the fear for themselves. At its core, it is the act of beginning a thought, warning, accusation, or emotional statement, then stopping before the meaning is complete. The person hearing it is left suspended in uncertainty, trying to finish the sentence with their own imagination. This trick works because the human mind hates emotional gaps. When someone says, "I was going to tell you, but never mind," or "if only you knew what people were saying," the brain does not simply ignore it. It starts searching for the missing ending. It pulls from insecurity, memory, guilt, and fear, trying to complete what was deliberately left open. The darker side of the unfinished sentence trick is that the victim may become more affected by what was not said than by what was said. A direct insult can be challenged, a clear accusation can be answered, but an unfinished sentence floats in the mind like a shadow. It cannot be proven wrong because it was never fully spoken. This trick becomes powerful because it gives the speaker control without accountability. They can create anxiety, then retreat by saying, "I did not say anything." Meanwhile, the other person is already unsettled, already guessing, already trying to earn the truth. What makes the unfinished sentence trick creepy is how little it takes to disturb someone's peace. A pause, a sigh, a sudden change of tone, or a sentence abandoned halfway can make the mind run into dark places on its own. The soft accusation effect. The soft accusation effect is one of the most quietly unsettling psychological tricks because it attacks without looking like an attack. At its core, it is the act of accusing someone indirectly, gently, or with fake concern, so they feel guilty while the speaker still appears calm, innocent, or reasonable. The accusation does not come as a loud confrontation. It arrives as a suggestion, a question, or a disappointed tone. This trick works because soft words can slip past emotional defenses. If someone says, "I just thought you were more considerate than that," or "I guess I expected too much from you," the person hearing it may feel accused, even though no direct blame was spoken. The mind starts searching for what it did wrong. Instead of responding to a clear charge, the person begins defending their character. The darker side of the soft accusation effect is that it makes guilt feel self-discovered. The manipulator does not need to say, "You hurt me." They only need to imply disappointment strongly enough that the other person begins carrying the blame. This can make someone apologize, explain, or overcompensate before they even understand what happened. This trick becomes powerful because it hides control behind emotional softness. The speaker can always deny bad intentions by saying, "I was just asking," or "I did not mean it that way." Meanwhile, the other person is already emotionally cornered. What makes the soft accusation effect creepy is how polite it can sound. No shouting, no direct insult. Just a gentle sentence placed carefully enough to make someone feel selfish, careless, or guilty without ever being openly accused. The reverse vulnerability trick. The reverse vulnerability trick is one of the most emotionally deceptive psychological tricks because it makes the victim comfort the person who caused the discomfort. At its core, it is the act of turning a tense moment around by suddenly becoming wounded, fragile, misunderstood, or emotionally exposed, so the other person stops confronting the issue and starts caring for the person who created it. This trick works because empathy can interrupt self-protection. When someone finally gathers the courage to say, "That hurt me," the manipulator may respond with, "I guess I am just a terrible person," or "Nobody ever understands me." Suddenly, the conversation shifts. The original pain is pushed aside, and the person who was hurt now feels responsible for calming the one who hurt them. The darker side of the reverse vulnerability trick is that it makes compassion feel like a trap. The victim may start apologizing for bringing up the issue. They may soften their words, hide their anger, or abandon their boundary because the other person seems too wounded to face accountability. This trick becomes powerful because vulnerability usually feels sacred. Most people do not want to attack someone who appears broken. But when vulnerability is used at the exact moment accountability is needed, it can become a shield against truth. What makes the reverse vulnerability trick creepy is how deeply it confuses the heart. The victim walks in needing honesty, but walks out feeling cruel for asking. The manipulator does not have to win the argument. They only have to look wounded enough that the other person forgets why they were hurt first. The agreement bait. The agreement bait is one of the most subtle psychological tricks because it makes control feel like a normal conversation. At its core, it is the act of getting someone to agree with a small, harmless statement first, then slowly leading them toward a bigger belief, decision, or confession they never planned to accept. The first agreement becomes the open door. This trick works because the human mind likes consistency. Once someone says yes to one idea, they often feel pressure to stay aligned with that yes. A manipulator may begin with something simple like, "You believe honesty matters, right?" Or, "You would agree that loyalty is important, wouldn't you?" The statement sounds innocent, so the person agrees. But then the speaker attaches a hidden demand to it. The darker side of the agreement bait is that it can make refusal feel like contradiction. After agreeing that loyalty matters, the victim may feel trapped when the manipulator says, "Then why are you questioning me?" After agreeing that kindness matters, they may struggle to say no without feeling cruel. This trick becomes powerful because it uses a person's own values against them. The manipulator does not need to force agreement at the end. They only need to guide the person into a position where disagreeing feels like betraying what they already admitted. What makes the agreement bait creepy is how calm it sounds. No threat is needed. No obvious pressure appears. just a few easy yeses placed in the right order can make someone feel morally trapped, emotionally cornered, and responsible for accepting something they never truly chose. The hidden comparison effect. The hidden comparison effect is one of the most emotionally sharp psychological tricks because it makes someone feel measured without being openly criticized. At its core, it is the act of comparing a person to someone else indirectly, so they begin feeling inadequate, replaceable, or pressured to prove their worth. The comparison is not always loud. Sometimes it hides inside a compliment, a casual story, or a passing remark. This trick works because humans are sensitive to social ranking. When someone says, "Some people would have handled that differently," or "I know someone who never complains about things like this," the listener may feel judged even if their name was not directly attacked. The mind immediately asks, "Am I not enough? Am I being replaced? Do they respect someone else more?" The darker side of the hidden comparison effect is that it can make people compete for approval they should never have had to earn. A manipulator may mention an ex, a friend, a coworker, or even a stranger in a way that quietly highlights what the victim lacks. Instead of seeing the comment as unfair, the victim may start trying harder to become the preferred version. This trick becomes powerful because the comparison remains deniable. The speaker can say, "I was just making a point," or "You are taking it personally." But the emotional damage has already landed. What makes the hidden comparison effect creepy is how it plants insecurity without admitting cruelty. One carefully placed comparison can make someone feel smaller, less special, and suddenly afraid that their position in someone's life is not as safe as they thought. The false calm technique. The false calm technique is one of the most unsettling psychological tricks because it makes control look like maturity. At its core, it is the act of staying unusually calm during a tense moment, not because the person is peaceful, but because they want the other person to look emotional, unstable, or unreasonable by comparison. This trick works because calmness is often mistaken for truth. When one person speaks softly while the other is hurt, frustrated, or desperate to be understood, outsiders may assume the calm person is more rational. Even the victim may start doubting themselves. They may think, "Why am I reacting so strongly?" while ignoring the fact that their reaction may be coming from repeated disrespect, confusion, or emotional pressure. The darker side of the false calm technique is that it can make genuine pain look like overreaction. A manipulator may provoke someone privately, dismiss their feelings, twist their words, or push their limits. Then, when the person finally reacts, the manipulator becomes quiet, controlled, and almost gentle. Suddenly, the focus shifts away from what caused the pain and onto how the victim expressed it. This trick becomes powerful because it gives the manipulator a clean image. They can say, "I am just trying to talk calmly," while using that calmness to make the other person feel ashamed. What makes the false calm technique creepy is how invisible the aggression becomes. No shouting, no obvious attack. Just a steady voice, a blank face, and a controlled tone that turns someone else's emotional wound into evidence against them. The emotional echo trick. The emotional echo trick is one of the most quietly powerful psychological tricks because it makes someone feel understood before they have been truly known. At its core, it is the act of reflecting another person's emotions back to them in a way that feels deep, personal, and comforting. The person hears their own pain, excitement, fear, or longing repeated through someone else's voice, and it creates the feeling of instant connection. This trick works because people do not only want advice, they want evidence that someone can feel what they feel. When someone says, "You must have felt completely alone in that moment," or "That probably made you feel like nobody really saw you," the listener may feel exposed in a strangely comforting way. It feels like being emotionally recognized. The darker side of the emotional echo trick is that it can create false intimacy. A manipulator does not need to understand the person deeply. They only need to echo the right emotion at the right time. If someone feels abandoned, they echo abandonment. If someone feels betrayed, they echo betrayal. If someone feels unseen, they echo invisibility. This trick becomes powerful because emotional recognition lowers defenses faster than facts. The victim may begin to trust the person, reveal private wounds, and believe the connection is rare. They may confuse being studied with being understood. What makes the emotional echo trick creepy is how beautifully it can disguise itself as empathy. The words may sound gentle, even healing, but behind them can be calculation. Someone can hold up a mirror to your emotions so perfectly that you mistake the reflection for love, safety, or truth. The strategic forgetfulness effect. The strategic forgetfulness effect is one of the most frustrating psychological tricks because it makes accountability disappear behind a harmless excuse. At its core, it is the act of forgetting promises, details, boundaries, or hurtful actions only when remembering them would require responsibility. The person does not forget everything. They forget the parts that make them answer for what they did. This trick works because forgetfulness sounds innocent. Everyone forgets things sometimes, so it becomes difficult to challenge without sounding harsh. When someone says, "I do not remember saying that," or "I forgot we talked about it," the victim may feel forced to prove what happened. Suddenly, the issue is no longer the broken promise. The issue becomes whether the memory can be defended. The darker side of the strategic forgetfulness effect is that it makes the victim feel unreasonable for expecting consistency. They may start keeping screenshots, repeating themselves, explaining boundaries again and again, or lowering their expectations just to avoid another argument. Over time, the person who remembers becomes tired, while the person who forgets stays protected. This trick becomes powerful because it creates emotional imbalance. One person carries the full history of the relationship, while the other escapes parts of it whenever those parts become inconvenient. The victim may begin to question whether they are too demanding, too sensitive, or too focused on the past. What makes the strategic forgetfulness effect creepy is how cleanly it erases responsibility. A forgotten promise can still hurt. A forgotten insult can still leave damage. But when someone chooses forgetfulness at the perfect moment, the truth starts feeling like something only one person is forced to remember. The forced explanation trap. The forced explanation trap is one of the most exhausting psychological tricks because it makes a person defend something that should not need defending. At its core, it is the act of pressuring someone to explain their feelings, choices, boundaries, or discomfort again and again until they begin to sound guilty, confused, or unsure of themselves. This trick works because most people want to be understood. When someone asks, "Why would you feel that way?" or "Explain exactly what I did wrong," it can sound reasonable at first, but when the explanation is never accepted, the conversation becomes a maze. The person keeps adding details, repeating memories, and justifying emotions that were already valid. The darker side of the forced explanation trap is that it turns clarity into exhaustion. The victim may enter the conversation with a simple boundary, but leave feeling like they are on trial. They may start over-explaining, apologizing, or softening the truth just to make the questioning stop. What began as self-expression becomes self-defense. This trick becomes powerful because it shifts attention away from the original issue. Instead of asking whether the behavior was hurtful, the focus becomes whether the victim can explain it perfectly enough to be believed. Any hesitation, emotional reaction, or missing detail can then be used against them. What makes the forced explanation trap creepy is how innocent it can appear. It hides behind questions, it wears the face of curiosity, but underneath, it can slowly drain someone's certainty until they feel they must earn the right to feel hurt, uncomfortable, or done. The sudden distance effect. The sudden distance effect is one of the most emotionally destabilizing psychological tricks because it turns closeness into uncertainty without warning. At its core, it is the act of suddenly becoming colder, quieter, slower to respond, or less emotionally available after a period of warmth. Nothing is clearly explained. Nothing is directly ended. The person is simply left feeling the shift and trying to understand what changed. This trick works because humans become attached to emotional patterns. When someone has been attentive, affectionate, interested, or present, the mind begins to expect that rhythm. Then, when the warmth disappears suddenly, the nervous system reacts as if safety has been removed. The person starts checking messages, replaying conversations, measuring tone, and searching for the exact moment everything changed. The darker side of the sudden distance effect is that it can make people chase the version of someone they had before. Instead of asking whether the distance is unfair, they focus on getting the closeness back. They may become more available, more apologetic, more careful, or more willing to ignore red flags just to restore the old feeling. This trick becomes powerful because distance creates hunger. When attention is consistent, it feels normal. When attention is removed without explanation, it becomes valuable. The person may start treating basic communication like a reward. What makes the sudden distance effect creepy is how quietly it can control someone's emotions. No insult is needed. No threat is made. Just a sudden emotional withdrawal can make someone feel replaceable, confused, and desperate to prove they still matter. The polite pressure technique. The polite pressure technique is one of the most difficult psychological tricks to resist because it hides force behind good manners. At its core, it is the act of pushing someone toward a decision, favor, confession, or agreement while speaking softly, smiling calmly, and making the pressure look reasonable. The person being pressured may feel trapped, but they also feel rude for saying no. This trick works because politeness creates social obligation. When someone asks gently, "Could you just do this one small thing?" Or, "I would really appreciate it if you did not make this difficult," the words may sound harmless, but underneath the softness, there is pressure. The listener feels pulled between protecting themselves and keeping the interaction peaceful. The darker side of the polite pressure technique is that it makes boundaries feel aggressive. A manipulator may keep their tone sweet while ignoring every refusal. They may repeat the request, act disappointed, or make the other person feel dramatic for resisting. Because the pressure is wrapped in calm language, the victim may question whether they are overreacting. This trick becomes powerful because it uses social discomfort as a weapon. Many people would rather agree than appear selfish, cold, or difficult. The manipulator does not need to shout. They only need to make refusal feel socially expensive. What makes the polite pressure technique creepy is how clean it looks from the outside. Everyone may see patience, manners, and a soft voice, but the person receiving it feels the invisible squeeze, knowing that every polite word is slowly pushing them toward surrender. The compliment withdrawal trick. The compliment withdrawal trick is one of the most emotionally painful psychological tricks because it turns praise into something a person starts begging to receive again. At its core, it is the act of giving someone admiration, attention, or validation at first, then slowly removing it until they begin wondering what they did wrong. The compliment is not simply kindness anymore. It becomes a reward that can be taken away. This trick works because praise creates emotional warmth. When someone tells you that you are special, talented, beautiful, intelligent, different, or deeply understood, the mind remembers how that recognition felt. It feels like being chosen, but when that same person suddenly stops noticing you, stops praising you, or becomes emotionally flat, the absence feels personal. The darker side of the compliment withdrawal trick is that it can make people work harder for approval they once received freely. They may change their behavior, soften their opinions, seek reassurance, or overperform just to hear one kind sentence again. Instead of asking why the praise disappeared, they begin asking how to earn it back. This trick becomes powerful because it attaches self-worth to another person's response. The victim may start measuring their value by whether the manipulator seems impressed, pleased, or emotionally available. A missing compliment can begin to feel like rejection. What makes the compliment withdrawal trick creepy is how quietly it reshapes confidence. The same words that once lifted someone can become the silence that breaks them. When praise is given like sunlight and then removed like punishment, a person may start chasing warmth from the very person who made them feel cold. The micro-rejection effect. The micro-rejection effect is one of the most quietly damaging psychological tricks because it wounds a person in tiny ways that are easy to deny. At its core, it is the act of giving small signals of rejection, disinterest, or dismissal without making the rejection obvious enough to confront. A delayed reply, a colder tone, a missing smile, a quick glance away, or a sudden lack of enthusiasm can all become emotional needles. This trick works because the human mind is sensitive to belonging. People do not only notice what is said, they notice what changes. When someone who used to respond warmly becomes slightly distant, the brain begins searching for meaning. The person may wonder if they are annoying, unwanted, boring, or no longer valued. The darker side of the micro-rejection effect is that it can make someone shrink themselves. They may talk less, ask for less, laugh less, or become careful around the person giving these tiny signals. Because each rejection seems too small to name, the victim may feel foolish for being hurt. Yet the repeated pattern slowly creates insecurity. This trick becomes powerful because it creates pain without clear evidence. The manipulator can say, "You are imagining things," or "Nothing happened," while the other person feels the emotional temperature dropping again and again. What makes the micro-rejection effect creepy is how invisible it can look from the outside. No harsh words are needed. No dramatic rejection happens. Just small moments of emotional removal can make someone feel unwanted, replaceable, and desperate to win back a warmth that is being quietly taken away. The concern mask. The concern mask is one of the most deceptive psychological tricks because it makes control look like care. At its core, it is the act of hiding criticism, judgment, suspicion, or interference behind the appearance of worry. The person does not say, "I want to control you." They say, "I am only concerned about you." And suddenly their intrusion feels harder to question. This trick works because concern is socially protected. When someone appears worried, most people hesitate to challenge them. A sentence like, "I just do not think that person is good for you," or "I am worried you are changing," may sound loving on the surface, but underneath, it can carry pressure, disapproval, or a hidden demand to obey. The darker side of the concern mask is that it can make people doubt their own choices. A manipulator may question your friends, dreams, confidence, clothes, goals, or independence, but present every criticism as protection. Over time, you may start asking, maybe they are right, even when their concern is slowly making your world smaller. This trick becomes powerful because it attacks freedom without looking hostile. If you resist, they can say, "I am only trying to help." If you get upset, they can act wounded. The victim is then made to feel ungrateful for rejecting something that was never truly kindness. What makes the concern mask creepy is how gentle it sounds while it steals certainty. It can enter your life as advice, settle in as worry, and slowly become a voice inside your head, telling you not to trust yourself. The quiet superiority signal. The quiet superiority signal is one of the most uncomfortable psychological tricks because it makes someone feel beneath another person without a direct insult. At its core, it is the act of using calm expressions, slow responses, subtle smirks, dismissive pauses, or carefully chosen words to suggest, "I am above you," while never saying it openly. This trick works because people can feel status before they can explain it. A person may not raise their voice or criticize directly, yet their tone can make others feel small. A simple, "interesting," said with the wrong pause, can feel like judgment. A relaxed smile during someone's frustration can feel like humiliation. A slow reply can make the other person feel desperate, emotional, or less intelligent. The darker side of the quiet superiority signal is that it forces the victim to react to something invisible. If they call it out, they may sound insecure. If they ignore it, the feeling remains. This creates a painful inner conflict where the person knows they are being looked down on but struggles to prove it. This trick becomes powerful because superiority does not always need words. It can live in posture, silence, timing, eye contact, and tone. The person using it may appear composed, mature, or unbothered, while the other person feels increasingly tense. What makes the quiet superiority signal creepy is how deeply it can affect self-worth. No obvious attack happens, yet someone leaves the interaction feeling smaller, foolish, and strangely ashamed, as if they were quietly judged and found lacking without a single clear sentence to defend against. The artificial urgency trick. The artificial urgency trick is one of the most stressful psychological tricks because it makes a person feel they must act before they can think. At its core, it is the act of creating a false sense of time pressure, making someone believe that a decision, reply, purchase, apology, or agreement must happen immediately, even when there is no real emergency. This trick works because urgency weakens reflection. When the mind feels rushed, it stops examining details carefully and starts looking for the quickest way to reduce pressure. A sentence like, "I need your answer now," or "This chance will not come again," can make someone feel that waiting is dangerous. The body reacts before the mind has time to question the situation. The darker side of the artificial urgency trick is that it can push people into choices they would never make calmly. They may agree to something unfair, reveal private information, accept blame, send money, forgive too quickly, or abandon a boundary because the pressure feels too intense to resist. This trick becomes powerful because fear makes hesitation feel like loss. The manipulator does not need to prove the deadline is real. They only need to make the person afraid of missing something, losing someone, disappointing someone, or making things worse by pausing. What makes the artificial urgency trick creepy is how it steals the space where wisdom lives. A person may think they are making a choice, but really, they are reacting to pressure. And by the time they finally breathe, the decision has already been pulled out of them. The incomplete praise effect. The incomplete praise effect is one of the most emotionally sharp psychological tricks because it gives someone validation, then leaves a small emptiness inside it. At its core, it is the act of praising a person in a way that feels almost satisfying, but not fully complete. The compliment lands, but something is missing, and that missing piece becomes the hook. This trick works because people remember unfinished approval more strongly than complete approval. When someone says, "You did well, but I expected even more from you," or "You look good today, just not like before," the mind does not rest on the praise, it focuses on the gap. The person starts wondering what was wrong, what changed, and how to earn the full version of the compliment. The darker side of the incomplete praise effect is that it can make someone chase approval that keeps moving slightly out of reach. They may work harder, dress differently, speak softer, perform better, or become more agreeable just to hear praise without the hidden wound attached to it. This trick becomes powerful because it mixes reward with insecurity. The victim receives enough validation to stay hopeful, but enough criticism to stay unsettled. They are not fully rejected, so they do not leave. They are not fully praised, so they do not relax. What makes the incomplete praise effect creepy is how gentle it can sound. A half compliment can feel like affection, guidance, or honesty, while quietly teaching someone that they are almost enough, but never completely enough to stop trying. The emotional whiplash trick. The emotional whiplash trick is one of the most destabilizing psychological tricks because it throws a person between comfort and pain so quickly that they stop feeling emotionally safe. At its core, it is the act of switching suddenly between kindness and coldness, praise and criticism, closeness and distance, apology and blame, until the other person begins living in a state of constant emotional alert. This trick works because the human nervous system looks for patterns. When someone is warm one moment and harsh the next, the mind tries to predict which version will appear. The victim begins studying tone, facial expressions, message timing, and small shifts in mood. They are no longer simply relating to the person, they are monitoring them. The darker side of the emotional whiplash trick is that it can make chaos feel like attachment. After a painful moment, a sudden return of affection feels like relief. The victim may mistake that relief for love, safety, or proof that things are getting better. But the warmth only feels powerful because it follows confusion. This trick becomes dangerous because it trains people to stay for the next good moment. They may ignore the hurt because they remember the sweetness. They may excuse disrespect because the apology felt sincere. They may keep hoping the kind version will finally stay. What makes the emotional whiplash trick creepy is how it slowly rewires expectation. Peace starts feeling suspicious. Consistency starts feeling unfamiliar. The victim becomes attached not only to the person, but to the cycle itself, waiting for the next soft moment to rescue them from the last painful one again. The loyalty test. The loyalty test is one of the most emotionally unfair psychological tricks because it turns trust into a performance. At its core, it is the act of placing someone in a situation where they must prove their love, friendship, honesty, or commitment through unnecessary sacrifice. The person is not simply being trusted, they are being tested. This trick works because most people do not want to be seen as disloyal. When someone says, "If you really cared, you would do this," or "I just wanted to see if you would choose me," the listener may feel trapped. Refusing the test can make them look selfish. Passing the test may cost them peace, boundaries, or dignity. The darker side of the loyalty test is that it makes love feel conditional. A manipulator may create fake emergencies, demand secrets, ask someone to cut people off, or force them to choose sides just to prove devotion. The victim may begin sacrificing more and more, not because it feels right, but because they fear being accused of betrayal. This trick becomes powerful because it attacks identity. Nobody wants to feel like the bad friend, the bad partner, or the ungrateful person. so they may ignore their discomfort just to protect how they are seen. What makes the loyalty test creepy is that it never truly ends. Once someone accepts the first test, another one can appear. The goal is not trust. The goal is control disguised as emotional proof, until loyalty stops being a choice and becomes something the person must keep proving to avoid punishment. The guilt reframe. The guilt reframe is one of the most emotionally heavy psychological tricks because it turns a person's normal boundary into something that feels selfish. At its core, it is the act of changing the meaning of someone's choice so they no longer feel protective, reasonable, or honest. They begin to feel cruel. This trick works because guilt is powerful enough to override judgment. A person may say no because they are tired, uncomfortable, busy, or emotionally drained. But a manipulator can reframe that no as rejection, betrayal, pride, or lack of love. Suddenly, the issue is no longer the request. The issue becomes the victim's character. The darker side of the guilt reframe is that it makes people abandon themselves to avoid feeling bad. A sentence like, "I guess I do not matter to you," or "After everything I have done, this is how you treat me," can make someone feel responsible for another person's pain. They may apologize, give in, or explain too much, even when their original decision was healthy. This trick becomes powerful because it does not always sound aggressive. Sometimes it sounds sad, disappointed, wounded, or quiet. That emotional softness makes the pressure harder to resist. The victim begins asking, "Am I being unfair?" instead of asking, "Why is my boundary being punished?" What makes the guilt reframe creepy is how quickly it can rewrite reality. A person can enter the conversation trying to protect their peace and leave feeling like they committed an emotional crime simply because they refuse to be controlled. The innocent question trap. The innocent question trap is one of the most deceptive psychological tricks because it hides pressure inside curiosity. At its core, it is the act of asking a question that sounds harmless on the surface, but is designed to make someone reveal information, defend themselves, feel guilty, or walk into a conclusion they did not choose. This trick works because questions feel less aggressive than statements. When someone asks, "Why are you being so defensive?" or "Is there a reason you did not tell me earlier?" the listener may feel forced to answer, even if the question is loaded. The danger is that the question already contains a hidden accusation. It does not ask for truth. It pushes the person into explaining themselves from a weaker position. The darker side of the innocent question trap is that it can make someone expose more than they intended. A manipulator may pretend to be confused, concerned, or casually interested while guiding the conversation toward private fears, hidden guilt, or emotional weak points. The victim may keep answering because refusing to answer feels suspicious. This trick becomes powerful because it gives the questioner control of the frame. Whoever asks the questions often controls what the other person has to think about. Instead of choosing their own position, the victim is pulled into reacting, clarifying, and proving. What makes the innocent question trap creepy is how normal it sounds. No threat is made, no insult is spoken. Just one soft question can make someone feel exposed, cornered, and strangely guilty, as if they have already done something wrong before they even answer. The false choice technique. The false choice technique is one of the most controlling psychological tricks because it makes someone feel free while quietly limiting what freedom they actually have. At its core, it is the act of presenting two or more options that all benefit the person creating the choice while hiding better options that would give the other person real control. This trick works because choice creates the feeling of power. When someone says, "Do you want to talk about this now or later tonight?" it may sound fair, but the hidden assumption is that the conversation must happen on their terms. The person is not being asked whether they are ready, whether they agree, or whether the issue is even valid. They are only choosing between the options already placed in front of them. The darker side of the false choice technique is that it can make resistance feel unreasonable. A manipulator may say, "I gave you a choice," even though both options were designed to lead to the same result. The victim may feel trapped, but also confused because on the surface, it looked like they had a say. This trick becomes powerful because it disguises pressure as fairness. The person may accept one option just to avoid conflict, not realizing the real choice was removed before the conversation began. What makes the false choice technique creepy is how clean it feels. No force appears. No command is spoken. Yet the path is already narrowed, and the person may walk into surrender, believing they decided it themselves. The reputation leverage trick. The reputation leverage trick is one of the most frightening psychological tricks because it uses a person's image against them. At its core, it is the act of pressuring someone by reminding them how others might see them, judge them, doubt them, or talk about them if they do not behave the way the manipulator wants. This trick works because reputation feels tied to safety. Most people do not want to be misunderstood, embarrassed, exposed, or seen as selfish, rude, unstable, ungrateful, or disloyal. When someone says, "People will wonder why you acted like that," or "Imagine what everyone would think if they knew," the fear of public judgment begins doing the work. The darker side of the reputation leverage trick is that it can make people betray themselves to protect their image. They may stay silent, apologize when they are not wrong, accept unfair treatment, or agree to things they dislike because the thought of being judged feels heavier than the discomfort of giving in. This trick becomes powerful because it does not always need a real audience. Sometimes, the manipulator only needs to suggest that others are watching. The victim begins imagining whispers, criticism, disappointment, and shame before anything has even happened. What makes the reputation leverage trick creepy is how deeply it reaches into social fear. It turns dignity into a weapon and makes someone feel trapped between truth and appearance. The person may know what is right, but still feel forced to protect how they look because the threat is not just losing an argument, it is losing the version of themselves others believe in. The memory distortion effect. The memory distortion effect is one of the most unsettling psychological tricks because it makes someone question the reliability of their own mind. At its core, it is the act of reshaping how a person remembers an event by repeating a different version, adding emotional pressure, removing important context, or acting completely certain about details that may not be true. This trick works because memory is not a perfect recording. Human beings remember feelings, fragments, tones, and meanings, not every exact word in order. When someone confidently says, "That is not how it happened," or "You are remembering it wrong," the listener may begin to doubt themselves, especially if the other person sounds calm, certain, or offended. The darker side of the memory distortion effect is that it can make the victim lose trust in their own perception. They may start asking others for confirmation, rereading messages, replaying conversations, or staying silent because they fear being wrong again. Over time, the question changes from, "What happened?" to, "Can I even trust myself?" This trick becomes powerful because it does not always erase the whole truth. It only bends parts of it. A tone is softened. A threat is made to sound like concern. A cruel sentence is remembered as a joke. A boundary is reframed as an overreaction. What makes the memory distortion effect creepy is how quietly it can steal someone's confidence. The victim may still feel the pain of what happened, but if the memory is constantly challenged, they may begin believing the wound is real while the cause is imaginary. The praise then pause trick. The praise then pause trick is one of the most emotionally tense psychological tricks because it gives someone validation, then immediately traps them inside silence. At its core, it is the act of saying something kind, flattering, or approving, then pausing long enough for the other person to wonder what comes next. The praise lands first, but the silence after it begins to create uncertainty. This trick works because people naturally listen for emotional completion. When someone says, "You actually did very well," and then stops, the mind does not relax. It waits. It wonders if there is a hidden "but" coming. The person may begin scanning the speaker's face, tone, and body language, trying to understand whether the praise is real or whether criticism is waiting behind it. The darker side of the praise then pause trick is that it makes approval feel unstable. The victim may feel lifted for a second, then anxious the next. Instead of enjoying the compliment, they become alert, trying to earn the rest of the sentence before it turns against them. This trick becomes powerful because the pause creates emotional dependency. The person giving praise controls the next feeling. Will it become warmth, judgment, disappointment, correction? The listener is left hanging, emotionally open, and waiting for direction. What makes the praise then pause trick creepy is how small it looks. A compliment, a pause, a stare, and suddenly someone's confidence is suspended in another person's timing. The praise no longer feels like a gift. It feels like bait, placed carefully before uncertainty, making the listener crave completion from the same person who created the tension. The social proof pressure. The social proof pressure is one of the most persuasive psychological tricks because it makes someone feel wrong simply because others appear to agree. At its core, it is the act of using the opinions, choices, reactions, or silence of a group to push one person toward compliance. The pressure does not always come from truth. It comes from the fear of standing alone. This trick works because humans are social creatures. When someone says, "Everyone else understands this," or "You are the only one making it difficult," the mind begins to panic quietly. Even a confident person may start wondering if they are missing something. The thought of being the odd one out can make people question their judgment faster than facts can. The darker side of social proof pressure is that it can make people betray their instincts just to belong. A manipulator may exaggerate how many people agree with them, mention imaginary supporters, or use group silence as evidence. The victim may begin to feel isolated, difficult, dramatic, or foolish for resisting. This trick becomes powerful because belonging is tied to emotional safety. Most people would rather adjust themselves than be seen as the problem in a room full of agreement. Even when the group is wrong, the pressure can still feel stronger than personal conviction. What makes the social proof pressure creepy is how invisible it can become. No one has to directly threaten you. They only need to make you feel outnumbered, and suddenly, your own truth starts sounding weaker inside your head. The authority shadow effect. The authority shadow effect is one of the most intimidating psychological tricks because it borrows power from a person, title, institution, or invisible higher force. At its core, it is the act of making someone feel pressured by authority, even when that authority is not directly present, not fully involved, or not actually supporting what is being said. This trick works because humans are conditioned to respond to authority. When someone mentions a boss, expert, parent, leader, teacher, law, group rule, or powerful connection, the mind often becomes more cautious. A sentence like, "People above me are watching this," or "Someone important already agrees with me," can make the listener feel smaller before they even know the full truth. The darker side of the authority shadow effect is that it can silence questions. The victim may stop challenging the person in front of them because they feel they are really challenging something bigger. They may accept pressure, obey instructions, or doubt their own judgment because the situation suddenly feels official, serious, or dangerous. This trick becomes powerful because the authority does not need to appear. It only needs to be suggested. The shadow of power can be enough to change someone's behavior, especially if they fear punishment, embarrassment, rejection, or being seen as disrespectful. What makes the authority shadow effect creepy is how easily ordinary words can feel like a command when wrapped in borrowed power. The manipulator may be standing alone, but once they place an unseen authority behind them, the other person may feel surrounded, judged, and forced to comply. The suspicion plant. The suspicion plant is one of the most poisonous psychological tricks because it does not destroy trust all at once. It places one quiet question in the mind and lets fear do the rest. At its core, it is the act of suggesting that something may be wrong, hidden, fake, or dangerous without giving enough proof to confirm it. The person is not told what to believe. They are pushed to suspect. This trick works because suspicion grows faster when it is unfinished. A sentence like, "I would be careful around them," or "I am not saying they are lying, but something feels off," can make the listener start watching every small detail differently. A normal delay becomes evidence. A harmless smile becomes suspicious. A forgotten message begins to feel intentional. The darker side of the suspicion plant is that it can damage relationships without open conflict. A manipulator may not directly accuse anyone. They simply drop hints, ask suggestive questions, or act as if they know more than they are saying. The victim begins connecting dots that may not belong together. This trick becomes powerful because the mind tries to protect itself from betrayal. Once suspicion enters, trust starts needing proof to survive. The person may become guarded, distant, jealous, or quietly resentful, even when nothing has truly happened. What makes the suspicion plant creepy is how small the beginning can be. One careful comment can turn peace into doubt. One unfinished warning can make someone look dangerous. And once suspicion takes root, even silence can start sounding like evidence. The scarcity of attention trick. The scarcity of attention trick is one of the most emotionally addictive psychological tricks because it makes simple attention feel rare, valuable, and difficult to earn. At its core, it is the act of giving someone warmth, replies, interest, or emotional presence in limited amounts so they begin treating basic recognition like a reward instead of something normal. This trick works because the human mind values what feels scarce. When someone is always available, their attention may feel steady and safe. But when someone appears only sometimes, replies unpredictably, praises rarely, or becomes interested only in certain moments, the other person begins watching for those moments intensely. A small message can feel powerful. A short compliment can feel meaningful. A few minutes of focus can feel like proof that they still matter. The darker side of the scarcity of attention trick is that it can make people chase emotional crumbs. They may accept less than they deserve because the rare moments of attention feel so good when they finally come. Instead of noticing the absence, they become obsessed with the return. This trick becomes powerful because inconsistency creates hunger. The victim may start adjusting their behavior, appearance, tone, availability, or boundaries just to increase the chance of being noticed. Their emotional world begins revolving around whether the person pays attention today. What makes the scarcity of attention trick creepy is how quietly it can train someone to beg without using the word begging. No direct demand is made. No clear rejection is given. Just a controlled shortage of attention can make someone feel invisible, desperate, and strangely grateful for the smallest sign of warmth. The emotional temperature shift. The emotional temperature shift is one of the most confusing psychological tricks because it changes the emotional mood of an interaction without warning. At its core, it is the act of moving suddenly from warmth to coldness, from excitement to indifference, or from friendliness to distance, so the other person becomes unsettled and starts searching for what caused the change. This trick works because humans are sensitive to emotional atmosphere. When someone's tone, face, energy, or response suddenly changes, the mind immediately notices. A conversation that felt safe may suddenly feel tense. A person who seemed happy may suddenly become flat. The victim begins asking silent questions. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? Am I losing their approval? The darker side of the emotional temperature shift is that it can make someone emotionally monitor another person. Instead of relaxing, they begin studying every small change in mood. A shorter reply feels dangerous. A quiet face feels like punishment. A colder tone feels like rejection. The person becomes trapped, trying to restore warmth they did not remove. This trick becomes powerful because the manipulator controls the emotional climate. They can make the room feel safe, then unsafe, then safe again, without explaining anything. The victim may start adapting their behavior just to keep the temperature warm. What makes the emotional temperature shift creepy is how invisible it can be. No direct insult is needed, no clear threat is spoken. A slight change in tone, energy, or attention can make someone feel anxious, guilty, and desperate to return the connection to how it felt only moments before. The friendly interrogation technique. The friendly interrogation technique is one of the most deceptive psychological tricks because it makes questioning feel like bonding. At its core, it is the act of asking many personal, emotional, or revealing questions while appearing warm, curious, harmless, or deeply interested. The person being questioned does not feel attacked at first, they feel noticed. This trick works because attention can feel like connection. When someone asks about your past, your fears, your relationships, your regrets, or your private thoughts with a soft voice and patient interest, it can feel flattering. You may think, they really want to know me. But sometimes the questions are not about understanding you. They are about collecting information. The darker side of the friendly interrogation technique is that it can make someone reveal too much too quickly. A manipulator may smile, laugh, share a small detail about themselves, then ask something deeper from you. Because the mood feels relaxed, you may answer honestly before realizing how much power your words have given them. This trick becomes powerful because it hides extraction inside intimacy. The person asking questions controls the direction of the conversation, while the victim feels emotionally opened up. Later, those details can be used to pressure, guilt, flatter, compare, or manipulate them. What makes the friendly interrogation technique creepy is how safe it can feel while it is happening. No harsh tone is used. No demand is made. Just warm eye contact, gentle curiosity, and carefully timed questions can make someone hand over the very information that may later be used to control how they feel, think, or behave. The insecurity spotlight. The insecurity spotlight is one of the most painful psychological tricks because it makes a person's hidden fear feel publicly exposed. At its core, it is the act of drawing attention to someone's weakness, doubt, flaw, mistake, or private sensitivity in a way that feels small enough to deny but sharp enough to hurt. This trick works because insecurity already lives close to the surface. When someone quietly fears they are not attractive enough, smart enough, successful enough, loved enough, or respected enough, even a small comment can feel enormous. A sentence like, "You seem nervous today," or "I can tell that bothered you," may sound simple, but if placed carefully, it can make the person feel seen in the worst way. The darker side of the insecurity spotlight is that it can make someone lose confidence instantly. They may start adjusting their voice, posture, behavior, appearance, or opinions because they feel watched. Instead of being present, they become self-conscious. Instead of speaking freely, they begin managing how they are being perceived. This trick becomes powerful because it does not always look cruel. The person using it can pretend they were only observing, joking, or being honest. But the emotional effect is different. The victim feels exposed, smaller, and suddenly aware of the exact thing they wanted to hide. What makes the insecurity spotlight creepy is how quickly it can turn a private wound into a visible weakness. One quiet comment can make someone feel naked in a room full of people, even if nobody else noticed anything at all. The validation hook. The validation hook is one of the most emotionally seductive psychological tricks because it gives a person the exact approval they are secretly hungry for. At its core, it is the act of noticing someone's insecurity, longing, effort, or hidden need, then offering validation in a way that makes the person feel finally seen, chosen, or understood. This trick works because validation touches the part of the mind that wants proof of worth. When someone says, "I can tell you are different from everyone else," or "people do not appreciate how much you carry," the listener may feel exposed in a comforting way. The words enter through a place that was already tender. The darker side of the validation hook is that it can make someone emotionally dependent on the person giving approval. A manipulator may praise the exact wound they know someone carries. If the person feels ignored, they make them feel special. If the person feels weak, they call them strong. If the person feels unseen, they act like they see everything. This trick becomes powerful because validation can feel like safety. The victim may reveal more, trust faster, forgive quicker, or ignore warning signs because the person has touched something deeply personal. They are not only listening to compliments, they are listening to relief. What makes the validation hook creepy is how easily it can imitate care. A few perfectly placed words can feel like healing, but if the intention is control, the validation becomes bait. The person is not being loved for who they are. They are being studied for what they need to hear. The apology trap. The apology trap is one of the most emotionally confusing psychological tricks because it makes an apology feel like surrender instead of healing. At its core, it is the act of pushing someone to apologize quickly, repeatedly, or unfairly, not because repair is needed, but because the apology gives the other person control over the emotional story. This trick works because apologies carry moral weight. When someone says, "So you cannot even say sorry," or "a decent person would apologize," the listener may feel pressured to prove they are not cold, proud, or uncaring. Even if they are not fully wrong, they may apologize just to stop the tension. Once they do, the apology can be used as evidence against them. The darker side of the apology trap is that it can make someone accept blame for things they did not cause. A manipulator may provoke, confuse, dismiss, or hurt someone, then focus only on the victim's reaction. When the victim finally says sorry, the manipulator can say, "At least you admit it." Suddenly, the original harm disappears, and the apology becomes the new truth. This trick becomes powerful because many people would rather apologize than be seen as cruel. They may trade honesty for peace, swallowing their own pain so the conflict will end. What makes the apology trap creepy is how it turns remorse into a weapon. A simple "I am sorry" can become a cage, locking someone into guilt, rewriting the argument, and making them responsible for damage they were only trying to survive. The shame redirect. The shame redirect is one of the most painful psychological tricks because it moves attention away from what actually happened and places it on who the victim is supposed to be. At its core, it is the act of turning a real issue into a personal flaw, so the person stops focusing on the behavior that hurt them and starts defending their character. This trick works because shame reaches deeper than guilt. Guilt says, "I did something wrong." Shame says, "Something is wrong with me." A manipulator may say, "You are too sensitive. You always make things dramatic." Or, "This is why people get tired of you." Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about the hurtful action. It becomes about the victim's personality, worth, or emotional stability. The darker side of the shame redirect is that it makes someone abandon their own pain to escape humiliation. They may stop explaining what hurt them because every attempt becomes proof that they are difficult. They may apologize for reacting, shrink their feelings, or pretend they are fine just to avoid being labeled. This trick becomes powerful because shame silences faster than logic. A person who feels ashamed may not fight back. They may withdraw, overthink, and quietly accept mistreatment because speaking up feels like exposing themselves again. What makes the shame redirect creepy is how quickly it changes the room. One moment, someone is trying to name harm. The next, they are defending their right to feel hurt, as if their pain itself is the real problem. The private alliance trick. The private alliance trick is one of the most dangerous psychological tricks because it makes someone feel specially chosen while quietly separating them from others. At its core, it is the act of creating a secret emotional bond, private understanding, or hidden us against them feeling that makes the person believe they are trusted more than everyone else. This trick works because being chosen feels powerful. When someone says, "You are the only one I can talk to," or "Nobody understands this except you," the listener may feel important, needed, and emotionally close. The private connection feels like intimacy. It makes the person feel they have access to a deeper truth that others do not. The darker side of the private alliance trick is that it can turn closeness into isolation. A manipulator may use private conversations to slowly change how someone sees others. They may suggest that friends are jealous, family members are controlling, or outsiders would never understand. The victim begins trusting the private bond more than the people who might warn them. This trick becomes powerful because secrecy creates loyalty. Once someone feels part of a hidden alliance, questioning the manipulator can feel like betrayal. They may protect the secret, defend the person, and ignore red flags because the bond feels rare. What makes the private alliance trick creepy is how flattering it feels at first. It does not begin with control. It begins with being trusted. But slowly, the person may realize the private world they were invited into was not created to protect them. It was created to make everyone else feel far away. The hidden standard effect. The hidden standard effect is one of the most frustrating psychological tricks because it makes someone fail a test they never knew they were taking. At its core, it is the act of judging a person by an unspoken rule, secret expectation, or private standard, then making them feel guilty when they do not meet it. This trick works because people often assume fairness requires clarity. If someone expects something from you, they should say it. But a manipulator may stay silent, watch your behavior, and later act disappointed because you did not magically know what they wanted. They may say, "I thought you would understand," or "I should not have to explain everything." Suddenly, the victim feels careless, even though the rule was never made clear. The darker side of the hidden standard effect is that it trains people to guess. The victim may begin studying moods, predicting reactions, and overthinking every decision. They stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "What will upset them?" This creates emotional tension because the standard can always change. This trick becomes powerful because the manipulator controls both the rule and the punishment. If the victim gets it wrong, they are blamed. If they ask for clarity, they may be called insensitive. If they defend themselves, they may be told they should have known better. What makes the hidden standard effect creepy is how quietly it turns love, friendship, or loyalty into a guessing game. The person is not given a clear path. They are left walking through invisible rules, punished for stepping on lines they were never allowed to see. The approval drip. The approval drip is one of the most emotionally addictive psychological tricks because it gives validation in tiny, controlled amounts instead of freely. At its core, it is the act of offering small pieces of praise, attention, affection, or recognition, just often enough to keep someone hopeful, but not enough to make them feel secure. This trick works because the human mind responds strongly to unpredictable rewards. When approval comes every time, it feels normal. When approval never comes, people may eventually stop expecting it. But when approval appears occasionally, after silence, distance, criticism, or uncertainty, it becomes powerful. The person starts waiting for the next kind word, the next warm message, the next sign that they are still valued. The darker side of the approval drip is that it can make someone live emotionally from drop to drop. They may change their behavior, hide their feelings, soften their boundaries, or work harder just to receive another small moment of validation. A simple "good job, I miss you," or "you matter to me" can begin to feel like emotional oxygen. This trick becomes powerful because it keeps hope alive without giving real safety. The victim is not fully rejected, so they stay. They are not fully accepted, so they keep trying. What makes the approval drip creepy is how quietly it can train a person to survive on less than they need. Instead of noticing the emotional starvation, they become grateful for crumbs, mistaking controlled approval for love, loyalty, or genuine care. The fear of missing out pressure. The fear of missing out pressure is one of the most emotionally urgent psychological tricks because it makes someone feel they are about to lose something important if they do not act quickly. At its core, it is the act of making a person believe that an opportunity, relationship, secret, group, experience, or approval will disappear unless they respond, agree, or participate immediately. This trick works because the human mind fears exclusion. When someone says, "everyone else is already doing it," or "you may not get this chance again," the listener may stop thinking calmly. The fear is not only about losing the thing, it is about being left behind, forgotten, replaced, or locked outside, a moment that others will enjoy. The darker side of the fear of missing out pressure is that it can push people into choices that do not match their values. They may spend money, share private information, accept disrespect, join a group, forgive too fast, or say yes to something uncomfortable because the thought of missing out feels worse than the risk. This trick becomes powerful because urgency and belonging work together. The person does not feel like they are choosing freely. They feel like time is closing in, people are moving on, and hesitation will cost them something they may never recover. What makes the fear of missing out pressure creepy is how it turns anxiety into obedience. A person may think they are chasing an opportunity, but really, they are running from exclusion. The pressure does not need to prove the loss is real. It only needs to make being left out feel unbearable. The gentle dismissal effect. The gentle dismissal effect is one of the most quietly painful psychological tricks because it makes someone feel unimportant without openly insulting them. At its core, it is the act of brushing off a person's feelings, thoughts, concerns, or needs in a soft, calm, almost polite way, so the dismissal looks harmless while still leaving emotional damage behind. This trick works because rejection hurts even when it is delivered gently. When someone says, "you are overthinking it," "it is not that serious," or "let us not make a big deal out of this," the words may sound reasonable, but underneath, they can make the other person feel small, dramatic, or foolish for caring. The victim may begin questioning whether their feelings deserved space at all. The darker side of the gentle dismissal effect is that it slowly teaches people to silence themselves. They may stop bringing up concerns because every attempt is met with calm minimization. They may start shrinking their emotions before anyone else does it for them. Over time, they learn that speaking up will not create understanding. It will only create quiet embarrassment. This trick becomes powerful because it avoids obvious cruelty. The manipulator does not need to shout, mock, or attack. They only need to make the other person's experience seem unnecessary, exaggerated, or inconvenient. What makes the gentle dismissal effect creepy is how soft it feels while it erases someone's voice. A person can leave the conversation feeling wounded, yet unable to explain why. Nothing dramatic happened, but something important inside them was quietly pushed aside. The familiar pain trigger. The familiar pain trigger is one of the most emotionally piercing psychological tricks because it touches an old wound while pretending the moment is new. At its core, It is the act of saying or doing something that reminds a person of a pain they have already lived through, making their reaction stronger than the situation appears to deserve. This trick works because the mind stores emotional memory deeply. A person may have been ignored, abandoned, mocked, compared, rejected, or made to feel unworthy in the past. When someone later uses the same tone, the same silence, the same phrase, or the same cold withdrawal, the pain does not feel small. It feels familiar. The present moment pulls the old hurt back into the room. The darker side of the familiar pain trigger is that it can make someone easier to control. A manipulator may notice what makes a person anxious, ashamed, desperate, or afraid, then press that exact emotional bruise during conflict. They may not need to say much. One repeated behavior can send the victim back into survival mode. This trick becomes powerful because the victim may blame themselves for reacting strongly. They may think, "Why does this hurt so much?" without realizing that the pain is carrying history. The manipulator then acts confused, calm, or innocent, making the reaction look excessive. What makes the familiar pain trigger creepy is how personal it feels. It does not just hurt the person standing there today. It reaches backward, finds the version of them that was hurt before, and makes that old wound feel alive again. The over-explaining trap. The over-explaining trap is one of the most exhausting psychological tricks because it makes a person believe their truth is not valid unless they can explain it perfectly. At its core, it is the act of pressuring someone to keep clarifying, defending, justifying, and repeating themselves until their own confidence begins to weaken. This trick works because most people want to be understood. When someone keeps asking, "But why?" or "That still does not make sense," the listener may feel they have not explained enough. They add more details. They soften their words. They bring up examples. They try to sound calmer, clearer, and more reasonable. But the trap is that no explanation is ever enough. The darker side of the over-explaining trap is that it can make someone look guilty even when they are telling the truth. The more they explain, the more desperate they may sound. The more details they give, the easier it becomes for the manipulator to pick apart one sentence and ignore the main point. This trick becomes powerful because it turns emotional clarity into mental fatigue. The victim may forget that a boundary does not need a perfect argument. A feeling does not need a courtroom defense. A no does not need to become an essay. What makes the over-explaining trap creepy is how quietly it steals authority from someone's own voice. The person starts with certainty, but after enough questioning, they may leave feeling confused, embarrassed, and unsure, as if their truth became weaker simply because someone refused to accept it. The invisible competition trick. The invisible competition trick is one of the most emotionally draining psychological tricks because it makes someone feel they are competing without ever being told there is a contest. At its core, it is the act of placing another person, memory, standard, or imagined rival, beside someone in a subtle way, so they begin trying harder to prove they are better, more loyal, more attractive, more useful, or more worthy. This trick works because humans are sensitive to comparison even when it is not direct. When someone casually mentions how another person always understands, never complains, or would have handled this differently, the listener may feel challenged. Nothing has been openly demanded, but the emotional message is clear. Someone else may be doing better than you. The darker side of the invisible competition trick is that it can make someone chase approval they were never supposed to lose. They may start adjusting their behavior, giving more attention, working harder, apologizing faster, or hiding their discomfort just to secure their place. The competitor may not even be real. The pressure only needs to feel real. This trick becomes powerful because the manipulator can deny everything. They can say, "I was not comparing you," or "You are just insecure," while the victim feels the silent race happening inside their chest. What makes the invisible competition trick creepy is how it turns connection into performance. A person may stop feeling loved for who they are and start feeling measured against someone they cannot see, cannot question, and can never fully defeat. The comfort then control pattern. The comfort then control pattern is one of the most emotionally dangerous psychological tricks because it begins with safety before turning into restriction. At its core, It is the act of first making someone feel protected, understood, rescued, or deeply supported, then slowly using that comfort as a doorway to influence their choices, boundaries, and independence. This trick works because comfort lowers defenses. When someone appears during a lonely, painful, or uncertain season, their presence can feel like relief. They listen, they reassure, they make the person feel less alone. The victim may begin to think, "This person is safe," because the relationship first arrived as emotional shelter. The darker side of the comfort then control pattern is that support can quietly become permission to interfere. The same person who once comforted may later question your friendships, choices, routines, dreams, or boundaries. But because they were there during a vulnerable moment, their control may still feel like care. This trick becomes powerful because gratitude can blur warning signs. The victim may excuse possessiveness as protection, criticism as guidance, and pressure as concern. They may feel guilty for resisting the person who once helped them through pain. What makes the comfort then control pattern creepy is how gentle the beginning can be. It does not start with domination. It starts with warmth, patience, and emotional rescue. Then, little by little, the person who once made life feel safer becomes the one deciding what safety should mean. The comfort that once felt like freedom slowly becomes the reason someone feels unable to leave. The broken promise minimizer. The broken promise minimizer is one of the most quietly damaging psychological tricks because it makes disappointment feel like an overreaction. At its core, it is the act of breaking a promise, commitment, agreement, or expectation, then making the other person feel unreasonable for caring that it happened. This trick works because promises create emotional security. When someone says they will show up, change, call, help, stop, or do better, the mind begins to relax around that expectation. Trust forms around repeated words, but when the promise is broken and then minimized, the pain becomes confusing. The person is no longer just hurt by what did not happen. They are also made to feel foolish for believing it mattered. The darker side of the broken promise minimizer is that it slowly lowers someone's standards. A manipulator may say, "It was not a big deal. You are making too much out of this," or, "I forgot. Why are you acting like I betrayed you?" The victim may begin accepting excuses, shrinking their disappointment, and pretending they are fine just to avoid being called dramatic. This trick becomes powerful because it attacks the meaning of trust. If every broken promise is treated as small, the victim may stop expecting consistency at all. They may feel grateful for partial effort instead of asking for reliability. What makes the broken promise minimizer creepy is how it teaches someone to doubt their own disappointment. The promise mattered when it was made, but suddenly it becomes meaningless when it is broken. Over time, the victim may stop asking for what was promised and start blaming themselves for needing it. The moral high ground trick. The moral high ground trick is one of the most manipulative psychological tricks because it makes one person appear righteous while quietly making the other person feel dirty, selfish, or wrong. At its core, it is the act of placing yourself above someone morally, emotionally, or socially, so disagreement begins to look like proof that they are the bad person. This trick works because people care about being seen as decent. When someone says, "I would never treat someone that way," or "some of us actually care about doing the right thing," the listener may feel attacked without being directly accused. The conversation shifts away from the actual issue and becomes a silent trial of character. The darker side of the moral high ground trick is that it can make someone surrender just to escape shame. A manipulator may use kindness, loyalty, maturity, forgiveness, faith, sacrifice, or compassion as weapons. They may suggest that if you disagree, set a boundary, question them, or walk away, then you are cruel, ungrateful, immature, or morally weak. This trick becomes powerful because it makes defending yourself feel like proving their point. If you argue, you look defensive. If you stay silent, they control the story. If you leave, they call it avoidance. What makes the moral high ground trick creepy is how clean it looks from the outside. The manipulator does not appear controlling. They appear principled. But underneath the polished words, they are not trying to reach truth. They are trying to make you feel too guilty to stand your ground. The subtle exclusion effect. The subtle exclusion effect is one of the most quietly painful psychological tricks because it makes someone feel unwanted without giving them anything obvious to confront. At its core, it is the act of leaving a person slightly outside the circle through small omissions, delayed invitations, private jokes, ignored comments, or emotional distance that feels accidental but lands deeply. This trick works because humans are wired to notice belonging. When a group laughs at something you do not understand, when plans are discussed after they already happened, or when your message is answered with less warmth than everyone else's, the mind begins searching for meaning. The person starts wondering, am I still included? Did I do something wrong? Do they secretly not want me here? The darker side of the subtle exclusion effect is that it can make someone chase acceptance without anyone openly rejecting them. They may become more agreeable, more careful, more entertaining, or more useful just to feel invited back into the emotional center. Because the exclusion is never direct, they may feel embarrassed for being hurt by it. This trick becomes powerful because it creates insecurity while allowing denial. The person using it can say, "You are imagining things," or "Nobody excluded you," even though the pattern keeps making the victim feel invisible. What makes the subtle exclusion effect creepy is how quietly it attacks someone's sense of place. No one has to say, "You do not belong." A few missed glances, colder replies, and small private moments can make someone feel like they are standing outside a door everyone else was allowed to enter. The emotional debt reminder. The emotional debt reminder is one of the most uncomfortable psychological tricks because it brings old kindness back as a weapon. At its core, it is the act of reminding someone of past help, sacrifice, loyalty, money, support, or emotional care in order to make them feel guilty for saying no, disagreeing, leaving, or setting a boundary. This trick works because gratitude is powerful. When someone once helped you through a hard time, defended you, listened to you, or stood beside you, part of you remembers that care. So when they say, "Do not forget what I did for you," or "I was there when nobody else was," the past suddenly enters the present like evidence. The victim may feel selfish for protecting themselves. The darker side of the emotional debt reminder is that it can turn genuine help into emotional ownership. A manipulator may not ask directly for control, they simply keep reopening the memory of what they gave, until the other person feels they must keep paying with loyalty, silence, forgiveness, or obedience. This trick becomes powerful because it confuses appreciation with obligation. The victim may think, "Maybe I owe them more patience," even when the relationship is hurting them. They may stay longer, tolerate more, or apologize faster because leaving feels like betrayal. What makes the emotional debt reminder creepy is how it changes the meaning of kindness. What once felt like love begins to feel like a receipt. The person is no longer being reminded of care. They are being reminded that someone may have been keeping score from the beginning. The trust acceleration trick. The trust acceleration trick is one of the most dangerous psychological tricks because it makes closeness move faster than caution. At its core, it is the act of creating a sudden feeling of deep connection, safety, loyalty, or intimacy before enough time has passed to prove whether that trust is actually deserved. This trick works because trust usually grows through repeated behavior. People feel safe when someone is consistent, honest, respectful, and patient over time. But a manipulator may try to skip that process by sharing intense stories, making emotional promises, revealing personal details too quickly, or saying things like, "I feel like I have known you forever." The speed itself becomes part of the spell. The darker side of the trust acceleration trick is that it can make someone reveal too much before they are protected. The victim may share fears, secrets, desires, family problems, weaknesses, or emotional wounds because the connection feels unusually real. They may believe the bond is rare, when in truth, it may have been rushed on purpose. This trick becomes powerful because intensity can be mistaken for sincerity. When someone seems open, vulnerable, and deeply connected very quickly, the mind may confuse speed with destiny. The person stops asking, "Do I know them well enough?" and starts thinking, "Why does this feel so strong?" What makes the trust acceleration trick creepy is how sweet it can feel while caution is being removed. The victim may think they are entering a safe emotional space, but really, the door is being opened too fast before they can see who is standing on the other side. The secret keeper effect. The secret keeper effect is one of the most psychologically binding tricks because it makes someone feel trusted while quietly tying them to another person's hidden world. At its core, it is the act of giving someone private information, emotional confessions, or sensitive secrets so they feel special, responsible, and personally connected to the person who revealed them. This trick works because secrets create intimacy. When someone says, "I have never told anyone this," or "You are the only person I trust with this," the listener may feel chosen. The secret becomes proof of closeness. It makes the relationship feel deeper, more serious, and more protected than it may actually be. The darker side of the secret keeper effect is that it can make someone emotionally loyal before trust is truly earned. A manipulator may reveal something dramatic, painful, or risky, not because they are being honest, but because they want the other person to feel responsible for them. The victim may begin protecting the secret, defending the person, or staying silent even when something feels wrong. This trick becomes powerful because secrecy creates pressure. Once someone holds private information, walking away can feel cruel. Questioning the person can feel like betrayal. Speaking up can feel like breaking trust. What makes the secret keeper effect creepy is how easily it turns intimacy into obligation. A secret can feel like a gift, but sometimes it is a hook. The person may think they are being brought closer, when really, they are being pulled into a private emotional contract they never fully agreed to sign. The crisis bonding trick. The crisis bonding trick is one of the most emotionally intense psychological tricks because it makes danger, stress, or chaos feel like closeness. At its core, it is the act of using a difficult moment, real or manufactured, to create a fast emotional bond with someone before trust has had time to grow naturally. This trick works because crisis lowers emotional distance. When people go through fear, pressure, loss, confusion, or urgency together, the mind can mistake shared intensity for deep connection. A person who shows up during a painful moment may feel more important than someone who has been steady for years. The relief becomes attached to the rescuer. The darker side of the crisis. Bonding trick is that someone can create or exaggerate the crisis, then position themselves as the only person who understands, protects, or stays. They may say, "Nobody else would be here for you like this." Or, "After what we survived, you know we are different." The victim begins linking safety to the same person who may be feeding the instability. This trick becomes powerful because strong emotions leave deep memory. When fear is followed by comfort, the comfort feels unforgettable. The person may confuse emotional rescue with love, loyalty, or destiny. What makes the crisis bonding trick creepy is how quickly it can turn chaos into attachment. The victim may not realize they are bonding with the pattern, not the person. They remember who held their hand during the storm, but they may not notice who helped create the storm in the first place. The false safety signal. The false safety signal is one of the most deceptive psychological tricks because it makes someone relax before they should. At its core, it is the act of sending signs of comfort, honesty, patience, or protection so the other person feels emotionally safe, even when the intention behind those signals is not safe at all. This trick works because people look for cues before they trust. A soft voice, steady eye contact, gentle reassurance, patient listening, or repeated words like, "You can trust me," can calm the nervous system. The person begins to feel protected. Their guard lowers. They may speak more freely, reveal more deeply, or ignore the small discomfort they felt at the beginning. The darker side of the false safety signal is that it can create trust before trust has been earned. A manipulator may act calm, understanding, and harmless long enough for someone to open up. They may respect one boundary at first, only to cross bigger ones later. They may appear protective, only to become possessive when the person is emotionally attached. This trick becomes powerful because safety is not only logical, it is felt in the body. If someone makes you feel calm, familiar, or accepted, you may assume they are good for you, even when their behavior has not proven it over time. What makes the false safety signal creepy is how gentle the beginning can be. The person does not enter like a threat, they enter like relief, and by the time the victim realizes the safety was only a signal, not a reality, they may have already handed over trust, secrets, loyalty, and emotional access. The soft threat technique. The soft threat technique is one of the most chilling psychological tricks because it hides danger inside calm language. At its core, it is the act of warning someone about possible consequences without sounding openly aggressive. The threat is not shouted, it is placed gently, almost politely, so the other person feels fear while the speaker still appears controlled. This trick works because the mind reacts to implied danger even when the words seem harmless. A sentence like, "I would hate for people to misunderstand you," or "It would be a shame if this got complicated," can create pressure without making a direct attack. The victim feels that something bad may happen if they do not cooperate, but the threat is vague enough to be denied. The darker side of the soft threat technique is that it makes fear feel unreasonable to name. If the victim says, "Are you threatening me?" the manipulator can respond, "I am only warning you," or "You are taking it the wrong way." This forces the victim to carry the fear alone, while the speaker keeps a clean image. This trick becomes powerful because uncertainty makes the warning larger. The person begins imagining what could happen, who could be told, what could be lost, or how things could turn against them. The mind fills in the danger. What makes the soft threat technique creepy is how quiet it sounds. No obvious cruelty, no loud anger. Just a calm sentence placed at the right moment can make someone feel cornered, watched, and afraid to make the wrong move. The attention-reward cycle. The attention-reward cycle is one of the most emotionally addictive psychological tricks because it turns basic attention into something a person starts working to receive. At its core, it is the act of giving attention only when someone behaves in a way that pleases, benefits, entertains, or obeys the person controlling the reward. This trick works because attention is deeply tied to human worth. When someone responds warmly after you agree with them, praises you after you sacrifice something, or becomes affectionate only when you act the way they want, your mind begins connecting approval with performance. You start learning what earns their attention and what makes it disappear. The darker side of the attention-reward cycle is that it can train someone without them realizing it. The victim may stop expressing honest feelings because honesty leads to distance. They may become more available, more agreeable, more patient, or more careful because those behaviors bring warmth back. Over time, they are not simply interacting anymore. They are trying to unlock a reward. This trick becomes powerful because the reward does not need to be big. A quick reply, a soft compliment, a smile, a moment of affection, or a small sign of interest can feel huge when it follows emotional absence. The person begins chasing those moments like proof that they still matter. What makes the attention-reward cycle creepy is how quietly it changes behavior. No one says, "Obey me." No one admits there is a system, but attention appears and disappears in patterns until the victim starts shaping themselves around another person's approval, mistaking emotional conditioning for connection. The controlled confession trick. The controlled confession trick is one of the most deceptive psychological tricks because it uses honesty as a way to control trust. At its core, it is the act of admitting a small flaw, mistake, fear, or secret on purpose so the other person believes they are seeing the real truth, while the bigger truth remains hidden. This trick works because confession feels intimate. When someone says, "I have not always been perfect," or "I made mistakes before," the listener may feel they are dealing with someone brave enough to be honest. The small admission creates emotional credibility. It makes the person seem self-aware, humble, and safe to trust. The darker side of the controlled confession trick is that the confession is carefully chosen. A manipulator may admit to something minor so they can avoid being questioned about something worse. They may reveal just enough guilt to appear transparent, while still controlling what the other person is allowed to know. The victim may think, if they can admit this, they must be honest about everything else. This trick becomes powerful because partial honesty can lower suspicion faster than silence. Once someone confesses a little, the listener may stop digging deeper. The confession becomes a shield, not a doorway. What makes the controlled confession trick creepy is how real it can sound. The voice may shake, the words may feel raw, the moment may seem vulnerable, but sometimes the confession is not meant to reveal the truth. It is meant to decide where your attention stops, so the hidden part stays buried. The disappearing kindness effect. The disappearing kindness effect is one of the most emotionally confusing psychological tricks because it makes someone question what happened to the person who once felt safe. At its core, it is the act of showing warmth, patience, attention, affection, or generosity at the beginning, then slowly removing it until the other person starts chasing the version they first met. This trick works because the mind remembers beginnings strongly. When someone first appears gentle, understanding, thoughtful, or emotionally available, the person receiving that kindness builds trust around that image. They believe the warmth is the truth. So when the kindness begins to fade, they do not immediately see it as manipulation. They wonder what they did wrong. The darker side of the disappearing kindness effect is that it can make someone work harder to bring the old version back. They may become more careful, more forgiving, more agreeable, or more desperate to avoid conflict. Instead of asking why basic kindness disappeared, they begin asking how to earn it again. This trick becomes powerful because the early kindness becomes emotional proof. The victim may keep saying, "They were not always like this," or "I know the real them is still there." That memory becomes the reason they stay, even when the present keeps hurting them. What makes the disappearing kindness effect creepy is how it turns nostalgia into a trap. The person is not only missing warmth, they are grieving someone who may have been a performance. And the more the kindness disappears, the more valuable the memory becomes, until they start loving who someone was while surviving who they have become. The blame fog. The blame fog is one of the most mentally exhausting psychological tricks because it makes responsibility impossible to see clearly. At its core, it is the act of filling a conversation with excuses, counter-accusations, emotional reactions, unrelated details, and confusing explanations until the original issue becomes buried. This trick works because the human mind can only hold so much at once. When someone brings up one clear problem, such as a broken promise, a hurtful comment, or a crossed boundary, the manipulator may respond with 10 different directions. They may mention your tone, your past mistakes, their stress, someone else's behavior, or how badly they feel. Suddenly, the conversation becomes crowded. The darker side of the blame fog is that the victim starts losing the thread of their own pain. They came in knowing what hurt them, but now they are defending their memory, their attitude, their timing, and their right to speak at all. The issue becomes so foggy that asking for accountability starts feeling impossible. This trick becomes powerful because confusion protects the person who caused harm. If the truth cannot be held clearly, it cannot be addressed clearly. The victim may leave the conversation feeling guilty, tired, and unsure what they were even trying to say. What makes the blame fog creepy is how quickly it can erase a simple truth. One person can begin with, "That hurt me," and end up apologizing for bringing it up. The harm is still there, but now it is hidden inside so much noise that the victim starts doubting whether it was ever clear enough to name. The moving target trick. The moving target trick is one of the most frustrating psychological tricks because it makes someone chase approval that keeps changing shape. At its core, it is the act of setting a standard, demand, expectation, or condition, then shifting it once the other person finally reaches it. The person believes they are close to satisfying the issue, but the finish line quietly moves again. This trick works because effort creates hope. When someone says, "If you were more understanding, things would be better," the victim may try to become more patient. But once they do, the complaint changes. Now, they are too quiet, too emotional, too distant, too needy, or still not doing enough. The problem is never allowed to be solved because the goal was never real resolution. The darker side of the moving target trick is that it can make someone feel permanently inadequate. They may keep adjusting themselves, apologizing, explaining, improving, and sacrificing, yet still feel they are failing. Instead of noticing that the standard keeps changing, they begin believing they are the problem. This trick becomes powerful because it creates endless pursuit. The manipulator always has another reason to withhold approval, affection, forgiveness, or peace. Every time the victim thinks they have finally done enough, a new condition appears. What makes the moving target trick creepy is how quietly it drains self-worth. The person is not clearly rejected, so they keep trying. They are not fully accepted, so they keep changing. Over time, they stop asking whether the target is fair and start blaming themselves for never reaching it. The forced gratitude effect. The forced gratitude effect is one of the most emotionally uncomfortable psychological tricks because it makes someone feel guilty for not being thankful enough. At its core, it is the act of demanding appreciation, praise, loyalty, or emotional repayment after doing something that may have looked helpful, generous, or kind on the surface. This trick works because gratitude is tied to morality. Most people do not want to seem ungrateful, selfish, spoiled, or cold. When someone says, "You should be thankful," or "Most people would appreciate what I did," the listener may feel ashamed before they even examine whether the help was wanted, healthy, or fair. The focus shifts from what actually happened to whether they are responding correctly. The darker side of the forced gratitude effect is that it can make someone accept discomfort as a debt. A manipulator may give advice, money, attention, protection, or support, then use that act to silence complaint. If the victim questions them, they are accused of being unappreciative. If they set a boundary, they are told they do not value what was done for them. This trick becomes powerful because it traps the person between honesty and guilt. They may feel hurt by the same person they are expected to thank. They may feel controlled by the same gesture they are told was kindness. What makes the forced gratitude effect creepy is how it twists appreciation into obedience. A person may begin thanking someone not because they feel grateful, but because they are afraid of what will happen if they do not. Kindness stops feeling warm and starts feeling like something with a hidden price. The emotional contrast trick. The emotional contrast trick is one of the most powerful psychological tricks because it makes one feeling seem stronger by placing it next to its opposite. At its core, it is the act of creating emotional coldness, fear, distance, disappointment, or discomfort first, then suddenly offering warmth, approval, relief, or affection, so the second feeling hits harder than it normally would. This trick works because the mind measures emotion by contrast. A kind message feels pleasant on its own, but a kind message after hours of silence can feel like rescue. A compliment feels good by itself, but a compliment after criticism can feel like emotional oxygen. The person does not just enjoy the warmth, they feel relieved that the coldness has ended. The darker side of the emotional contrast trick is that it can make instability feel intense and meaningful. A manipulator may create tension, withdraw attention, act disappointed, or make someone feel unsure, then return with softness. The victim may mistake the relief for love, chemistry, forgiveness, or proof that the connection is special. This trick becomes powerful because pain makes comfort feel bigger. The person begins craving the return of warmth instead of questioning why the coldness keeps happening. They may start accepting emotional lows because the highs feel unforgettable afterward. What makes the emotional contrast trick creepy is how it can turn confusion into attachment. The victim may not realize they are being moved between hunger and relief, fear and comfort, distance and closeness. Over time, the emotional swing becomes the bond, and peace starts feeling less exciting than the dramatic return of warmth. The public embarrassment shield. The public embarrassment shield is one of the most cowardly psychological tricks because it uses an audience as protection. At its core, it is the act of saying, doing, or implying something hurtful in front of others, knowing the victim may stay quiet to avoid looking emotional, dramatic, or confrontational in public. This trick works because most people manage themselves differently when others are watching. In private, they may defend themselves clearly, but in a group, at a table, in a meeting, in a family gathering, or in front of friends, they may hesitate. They do not want to create a scene. They do not want people staring. They do not want to look too sensitive, so they absorb the discomfort quietly. The darker side of the public embarrassment shield is that it lets a manipulator hide cruelty behind social pressure. They may make a subtle joke, reveal something private, correct someone harshly, or make a humiliating comment with a smile. If the victim reacts, the manipulator can say, "It was just a joke," or "Why are you making this awkward?" This trick becomes powerful because the audience changes the victim's choices. Speaking up may feel risky. Staying silent feels painful. Either way, the manipulator gains control of the moment. What makes the public embarrassment shield creepy is how it turns other people into invisible walls. The victim may feel surrounded, even if nobody else understands what is happening. A single public comment can make someone feel exposed, trapped, and forced to smile while something inside them quietly collapses. The scarcity of approval trick. The scarcity of approval trick is one of the most emotionally addictive psychological tricks because it makes approval feel rare, precious, and difficult to earn. At its core, it is the act of giving praise, warmth, agreement, or recognition only in small amounts, so the other person begins working harder for every sign that they are accepted. This trick works because people naturally want to feel valued. When approval is steady, it creates security. But when approval appears only sometimes, after effort, silence, anxiety, or emotional distance, the mind starts treating it like a reward. A small compliment begins to feel powerful. A brief smile feels meaningful. A simple, "I'm proud of you," can feel like relief after emotional starvation. The darker side of the scarcity of approval trick is that it can make someone reshape themselves around another person's standards. They may become quieter, more agreeable, more impressive, more useful, or more forgiving just to receive another moment of validation. Instead of asking whether the approval is fair, they focus on how to earn more of it. This trick becomes powerful because scarcity creates emotional hunger. The victim is not completely rejected, so they keep hoping. But they are not fully accepted, so they keep trying. That unfinished need becomes the leash. What makes the scarcity of approval trick creepy is how quietly it changes someone's self-worth. A person may begin measuring their value by another person's reaction, waiting for small drops of approval from someone who knows exactly how thirsty they have become. The hidden punishment pattern. The hidden punishment pattern is one of the most emotionally confusing psychological tricks because the punishment is never openly named. At its core, it is the act of making someone suffer quietly after they say no, disagree, set a boundary, ask a question, or fail to behave the way another person wanted. The punishment does not always look like punishment. It may look like distance, coldness, delay, irritation, silence, or loss of affection. This trick works because people notice emotional changes before they understand them. When someone becomes colder after you speak honestly, replies slower after you set a boundary, or acts less interested after you disappoint them, your mind begins connecting your independence with consequences. You start learning that certain choices make them withdraw. The darker side of the hidden punishment pattern is that it trains people to avoid conflict by abandoning themselves. The victim may stop expressing needs, stop saying no, stop asking difficult questions, or stop sharing honest feelings because they fear the quiet punishment that follows. This trick becomes powerful because it is hard to prove. The manipulator can say, "Nothing is wrong," or "I am just tired," while the pattern keeps repeating. The victim feels the punishment, but cannot easily name it without sounding paranoid or needy. What makes the hidden punishment pattern creepy is how slowly it teaches obedience. No direct threat is needed, no rule is announced. But over time, the victim begins adjusting their behavior around the fear of emotional withdrawal, learning that peace only stays when they do not upset the person holding it hostage. The fear-based loyalty test. The fear-based loyalty test is one of the most controlling psychological tricks because it makes someone prove devotion through fear instead of trust. At its core, it is the act of creating a situation where a person feels they must choose, sacrifice, defend, obey, or stay silent to avoid being accused of betrayal. This trick works because fear can make loyalty feel urgent. When someone says, "If you really cared, you would stand with me," or "I need to know you are not like everyone else," the listener may feel emotionally cornered. They are not being asked for honest support. They are being pushed to prove they are safe, faithful, and dependable under pressure. The darker side of the fear-based loyalty test is that it can make people abandon their own judgment. A manipulator may demand that someone cut off a friend, hide the truth, take their side blindly, or tolerate behavior that feels wrong. The victim may obey, not because they agree, but because they fear losing the relationship, being punished, or being labeled disloyal. This trick becomes powerful because it turns love into a test and fear into the examiner. The person being tested begins to believe that peace depends on passing. They may start choosing silence over honesty and obedience over self-respect. What makes the fear-based loyalty test creepy is that it does not build real loyalty. It manufactures fear of rejection. The victim may think they are proving love, but slowly they are being trained to confuse devotion with submission. The silent ranking effect. The silent ranking effect is one of the most quietly painful psychological tricks because it makes someone feel compared, judged, and placed beneath others without a single clear statement. At its core, it is the act of treating people with different levels of warmth, attention, respect, or interest, so one person begins sensing where they stand in an invisible hierarchy. This trick works because humans notice emotional position. When someone gives another person faster replies, louder laughter, softer patience, deeper eye contact, or more public praise, the person receiving less begins to feel the difference. Nothing may be said directly, but the message still lands. You are not first, not favored, not valued in the same way. The darker side of the silent ranking effect is that it can make someone compete for a place they were never openly told they lost. They may become more helpful, more agreeable, more impressive, or more emotionally available just to rise in the invisible order. Instead of asking whether the treatment is fair, they begin trying to earn better placement. This trick becomes powerful because silence makes the ranking harder to challenge. The manipulator can deny everything and say, "I treat everyone the same," while the emotional pattern says otherwise. The victim feels the difference but struggles to prove it. What makes the silent ranking effect creepy is how deeply it can disturb someone's sense of worth. No one has to say, "You matter less." They only have to act slightly warmer towards someone else. And suddenly the victim begins measuring their value by where they seem to stand in another person's private scale. The rescue then rule trick. The rescue then rule trick is one of the most dangerous psychological tricks because it begins with help and ends with control. At its core, it is the act of stepping in during someone's weak, lonely, confused, or painful moment, giving them support, protection, money, comfort, or guidance, then later using that rescue as a reason to rule their choices. This trick works because rescue creates emotional attachment. When someone appears during a crisis, they can feel like safety. They listen when nobody else does. They solve a problem. They calm the panic. They make the person feel less alone. In that moment, gratitude becomes strong, and trust forms quickly because the rescuer seems like the reason things got better. The darker side of the rescue then rule trick is that the helper may slowly become the owner of the person's decisions. They may begin saying, "After everything I did for you, you should listen to me," or "You would not be here without me." Suddenly, help becomes authority. The victim starts feeling guilty for disagreeing with the person who once saved them. This trick becomes powerful because gratitude can silence resistance. The victim may accept advice they dislike, stay in unhealthy situations, cut off other support, or ignore their own instincts because saying no feels ungrateful. What makes the rescue then rule trick creepy is how beautifully it can begin. The person may enter your life like protection, but slowly become a prison. What looked like rescue may turn into a hidden contract, where every act of kindness is later used as proof that your freedom now belongs to them. The false intimacy effect. The false intimacy effect is one of the most emotionally deceptive psychological tricks because it makes closeness appear before real trust has been built. At its core, it is the act of creating the feeling of a deep bond through private stories, intense attention, emotional language, shared secrets, or sudden vulnerability, even when the connection has not had enough time to become genuine. This trick works because intimacy feels powerful. When someone speaks to you like you are special, shares personal pain, remembers small details, or says, "I have never felt this comfortable with anyone," the mind begins to soften. It feels rare. It feels meaningful. It feels like you are being allowed into a private room inside their life. The darker side of the false intimacy effect is that it can make someone trust too quickly. A manipulator may create emotional closeness before proving consistency, honesty, or respect. The victim may reveal secrets, ignore warning signs, forgive fast, or believe the relationship is deeper than it really is because the emotional intensity feels convincing. This trick becomes powerful because the brain can confuse depth with speed. Just because something feels intense does not mean it is safe. Just because someone shares private things does not mean they are trustworthy. What makes the false intimacy effect creepy is how beautiful it can feel while caution is disappearing. The person may think they have found a rare connection, but sometimes they are only standing inside a carefully built illusion where closeness is performed so trust can be taken before it is earned. The emotional hostage pattern. The emotional hostage pattern is one of the most draining psychological tricks because it makes someone feel responsible for another person's emotional survival. At its core, it is the act of using sadness, anger, panic, disappointment, or emotional collapse to make someone stay, obey, apologize, forgive, or give up their own boundary. This trick works because most people do not want to feel cruel. When someone reacts with intense distress every time you say no, pull away, disagree, or choose yourself, your nervous system starts treating your freedom like danger. You begin thinking before every decision, how will they react? Their emotions become the room you are forced to live inside. The darker side of the emotional hostage pattern is that it can make a person abandon their own needs to keep someone else stable. They may stay in conversations that hurt, accept blame that is not theirs, or give comfort while their own pain is ignored. The manipulator may not need to command anything directly. Their emotional reaction becomes the command. This trick becomes powerful because it makes leaving feel heartless. The victim may confuse compassion with responsibility, believing they must manage another person's feelings to prove they are good, loyal, or loving. Over time, their peace depends on keeping someone else calm. What makes the emotional hostage pattern creepy is how trapped it can make someone feel without visible chains. No locked door, no open threat. Just the constant fear that choosing yourself will make another person fall apart, and somehow, you will be blamed for the collapse. The manufactured misunderstanding. The manufactured misunderstanding is one of the most exhausting psychological tricks because it turns clear words into confusion on purpose. At its core, it is the act of pretending to misunderstand someone's meaning, boundary, request, or concern, so the conversation gets pulled away from the real issue and into endless correction. This trick works because people naturally want to be understood. When someone twists your words and says, "So you are saying I am a terrible person," or "So you do not care about me at all," the mind rushes to repair the false meaning. Instead of standing firmly on the original point, the victim begins explaining, softening, defending, and proving they did not mean what was deliberately misheard. The darker side of the manufactured misunderstanding is that it makes honesty feel unsafe. A simple concern becomes a long argument. A boundary becomes an accusation. A request becomes proof of selfishness. The victim may start choosing silence because speaking clearly still leads to distortion. This trick becomes powerful because the manipulator controls the emotional direction. They do not have to respond to what was actually said. They respond to the version they created, forcing the other person to fight a battle they never started. What makes the manufactured misunderstanding creepy is how innocent it can look. The person can act confused, hurt, or offended while quietly bending the conversation away from accountability. Over time, the victim may stop trusting their ability to communicate, not because they are unclear, but because someone keeps pretending not to understand them. The reputation fear trap. The reputation fear trap is one of the most frightening psychological tricks because it makes someone feel controlled by what other people might think. At its core, it is the act of using the fear of judgment, gossip, exposure, embarrassment, or social rejection to pressure a person into silence, obedience, apology, or compliance. This trick works because reputation feels like social survival. Most people want to be seen as good, honest, stable, loyal, respectful, and trustworthy. So when someone hints, "People may not see you the same way," or "Imagine how this would look if others knew," the mind begins to panic. The person may stop thinking about what is true and start thinking about how they might appear. The darker side of the reputation fear trap is that it can make people protect their image at the cost of their peace. They may stay quiet about mistreatment, accept blame they do not deserve, or agree to something unfair because the fear of being misunderstood feels unbearable. The threat does not always need to happen. The possibility is enough. This trick becomes powerful because reputation lives outside the person's control. Once someone believes their name, image, or character can be damaged, they may begin acting from fear instead of truth. What makes the reputation fear trap creepy is how invisible the prison can feel. No one has to lock a door. No one has to shout. A single suggestion that others might judge, laugh, doubt, or turn away can make someone abandon their own voice just to protect the version of themselves they think the world must keep believing. The confession weaponization trick. The confession weaponization trick is one of the most violating psychological tricks because it turns someone's honesty against them. At its core, it is the act of taking a private confession, vulnerable admission, past mistake, fear, insecurity, or painful truth that someone shared in trust, then later using it to shame, control, silence, or weaken them. This trick works because confession requires emotional openness. When someone admits something personal, they are not only sharing information, they are handing over a sensitive part of themselves and hoping it will be held with care. In that moment, trust feels real. The person may believe they are safe because the listener seemed understanding, patient, or accepting. The darker side of the confession weaponization trick is that the confession can later return as a weapon. A manipulator may say, "This is why you always do that," or, "After what you told me, you cannot judge anyone." Suddenly, the person's honesty becomes evidence against them. What was shared in vulnerability is dragged into conflict as ammunition. This trick becomes powerful because it teaches people to fear openness. The victim may stop sharing, stop trusting, and start hiding parts of themselves because one private truth was used to hurt them. They may feel exposed, foolish, or betrayed for ever speaking honestly. What makes the confession weaponization trick creepy is how deeply it corrupts trust. The wound is not only in what was said back to them, it is in realizing that someone may have been listening, not to understand, but to collect the very words that could later break them. The controlled access effect. The controlled access effect is one of the most emotionally powerful psychological tricks because it makes someone feel that closeness is a privilege, not a natural part of the relationship. At its core, it is the act of controlling when someone can reach you, hear from you, receive warmth, get answers, or feel emotionally connected, so access begins to feel earned. This trick works because humans attach meaning to availability. When someone is open one day and unreachable the next, warm in private but distant in public, responsive only when they feel like it, or affectionate only on their own terms, the other person begins adjusting around that access. They wait, they watch, they try to guess the right moment. The darker side of the controlled access effect is that it can make someone feel grateful for basic emotional presence. A manipulator may disappear, delay responses, withhold affection, or suddenly become unavailable, then return as if nothing happened. The victim may feel relieved instead of angry. They may treat the return as proof they still matter. This trick becomes powerful because it turns connection into a gate. The person controlling access decides when closeness is allowed and when distance is enforced. Over time, the victim may stop expecting consistency and start accepting whatever small opening they are given. What makes the controlled access effect creepy is how quietly it changes the meaning of attention. A reply becomes a reward. A conversation becomes permission. A moment of warmth becomes something to protect. The victim may think they are being patient, but slowly, they are being trained to wait outside someone's emotional door. The isolation by suggestion trick. The isolation by suggestion trick is one of the most quietly dangerous psychological tricks because it does not force someone away from others. It makes them doubt the people around them until distance begins to feel like their own choice. At its core, it is the act of planting small doubts about friends, family, partners, mentors, or support systems, so the person slowly begins pulling away from anyone who might protect them. This trick works because suggestion feels softer than command. A manipulator may not say, "Stop talking to them." Instead, they say, "I just think they do not really understand you," or "Have you noticed they never seem happy for you?" The words sound like concern, but they create suspicion. The victim begins watching people differently, searching for proof that the suggestion might be true. The darker side of the isolation by suggestion trick is that it can make healthy relationships feel unsafe. A caring friend may start looking controlling. A worried family member may seem jealous. A person who asks questions may appear like an enemy. Little by little, the victim becomes emotionally dependent on the same person who is weakening their outside connections. This trick becomes powerful because isolation does not happen all at once. It happens through repeated hints, private doubts, and quiet emotional framing. The victim may believe they are choosing peace when they are actually being separated from perspective. What makes the isolation by suggestion trick creepy is how invisible it can feel. No one is dragged away. No door is locked. The person simply wakes up one day with fewer voices around them and more trust in the one who made everyone else seem dangerous. The dependency loop. The dependency loop is one of the most controlling psychological tricks because it makes someone feel weaker every time they rely on another person for strength. At its core, it is the act of creating a cycle where one person gives support, guidance, approval, or emotional rescue, then slowly makes the other person feel unable to function without it. This trick works because dependence often begins with relief. When someone helps you make decisions, calms you down, gives advice, solves problems, or reassures you during uncertain moments, their presence can feel comforting. You may begin trusting their voice more than your own. At first, it feels like support, but over time, the support can become the reason your confidence starts fading. The darker side of the dependency loop is that the person being helped may slowly lose independence. They may stop making choices without checking first. They may feel anxious when the other person is unavailable. They may begin believing they are too emotional, too confused, too fragile, or too inexperienced to handle life alone. This trick becomes powerful because the manipulator may present themselves as the only stable person in the victim's life. They may say, "You always need me," or "You know things fall apart when you do not listen to me." The victim begins returning to the same person who made them doubt themselves. What makes the dependency loop creepy is how it turns help into a cage. The person thinks they are being supported, but slowly their inner strength is being replaced by someone else's permission, guidance, and approval until freedom starts feeling unsafe. The shame bond. The shame bond is one of the most emotionally damaging psychological tricks because it connects a person to someone through embarrassment, guilt, or self-disgust. At its core, it is the act of making someone feel exposed in their weakest place, then positioning yourself as the only person who still accepts them, understands them, or stays. This trick works because shame isolates. When someone feels ashamed, they do not usually run toward people. They hide. They become quiet. They start believing that if others knew the truth, they would be judged, rejected, or abandoned. A manipulator can use this by saying, "Nobody else would understand you like I do," or "After what you told me, you should be careful who you trust." The darker side of the shame bond is that it makes the victim cling to the very person who made them feel small. If someone knows their secret, their mistake, their insecurity, or their past pain, the victim may feel trapped. Leaving can feel dangerous because the shame might be exposed. Speaking up can feel impossible because they already feel morally weakened. This trick becomes powerful because shame attacks identity. The person no longer feels like they made a mistake. They feel like they are the mistake. That emotional collapse makes control easier. What makes the shame bond creepy is how deeply it can attach someone to pain. The relationship may not feel safe, but it feels familiar. The person may stay, not because they are loved well, but because someone has convinced them that their shame makes them harder for anyone else to love. The identity undermining trick. The identity undermining trick is one of the most damaging psychological tricks because it does not only attack what someone does, it attacks who they believe they are. At its core, it is the act of slowly weakening a person's confidence in their personality, values, intelligence, attractiveness, strength, or sense of self until they begin depending on another person to define them. This trick works because identity is built through repeated reflection. When people around you treat you as capable, worthy, and stable, you begin to carry that image inside yourself. But when someone repeatedly says, "You are not as strong as you think," "You always need help," or "You do not really know yourself," those words can begin to enter the mind like quiet poison. The darker side of the identity undermining trick is that it can make someone feel disconnected from the person they used to be. They may stop trusting their taste, their judgment, their memories, their dreams, or their instincts. The manipulator does not need to destroy them all at once. They only need to keep planting small doubts until confidence feels unfamiliar. This trick becomes powerful because a weakened identity is easier to control. If someone no longer trusts who they are, they may accept labels, rules, criticism, and direction from the person who keeps defining them. What makes the identity undermining trick creepy is how slowly it can erase someone from themselves. The victim may wake up one day and realize they no longer speak, choose, dress, dream, or think like they once did, because someone else has been quietly rewriting their reflection. The gaslight seed. The gaslight seed is one of the most disturbing psychological tricks because it does not destroy reality immediately. It plants one small doubt and lets the person's own mind begin the damage. At its core, it is the act of making someone question what they saw, heard, felt, remembered, or understood, just enough that certainty starts to weaken. This trick works because confidence in reality is fragile when another person speaks with enough calmness or conviction. A manipulator may say, "That never happened. You are remembering it wrong," or "You always exaggerate things." At first, the victim may resist. They may know what they experienced. But when the denial is repeated, especially by someone they trust, the mind begins to hesitate. The darker side of the gaslight seed is that it slowly turns self-trust into self-suspicion. The victim may start checking messages, replaying conversations, asking others for confirmation, or apologizing for reactions that were reasonable. They no longer ask only, "Did they hurt me?" They begin asking, "Can I even trust my own mind?" This trick becomes powerful because the seed does not need to prove anything. It only needs to create enough uncertainty for the victim to pause before believing themselves. Once that pause exists, control becomes easier. What makes the gaslight seed creepy is how small it can begin. One denied sentence, one mocked memory, one calm correction. But if it takes root, the victim may slowly stop standing on what they know and start waiting for someone else to tell them what is real. The reality reversal effect. The reality reversal effect is one of the most frightening psychological tricks because it turns the victim into the accused. At its core, it is the act of taking what one person did, said, or caused, then reversing the story so the person who was hurt begins looking like the person who created the harm. This trick works because confusion weakens certainty. When someone lies, then accuses you of being dishonest, hurts you, then says you are cruel for reacting, or crosses a boundary, then claims you are the one being controlling, the mind can become overwhelmed. The victim knows something is wrong, but the story has been flipped so aggressively that defending the truth starts to feel exhausting. The darker side of the reality reversal effect is that it can make someone apologize for pain they did not cause. A manipulator may say, "You made me act this way," or "You are the reason this happened." Suddenly, the original behavior disappears and the victim is dragged into defending their character. This trick becomes powerful because it shifts emotional pressure. The manipulator no longer has to answer for what they did. The victim now has to prove they are not selfish, unstable, dramatic, dishonest, or abusive. What makes the reality reversal effect creepy is how deeply it can damage self-trust. A person can enter the conversation knowing they were hurt, then leave wondering if they were the problem all along. Reality does not just become unclear. It gets turned upside down until the victim starts carrying the guilt that belonged to someone else. The double bind trap. The double bind trap is one of the most suffocating psychological tricks because it makes every choice feel wrong. At its core, it is the act of placing someone in a situation where no matter what they say, do, explain, or refuse, they can still be blamed, criticized, or made to feel guilty. This trick works because the mind becomes trapped when both exits lead to punishment. If the person speaks up, they are called dramatic. If they stay silent, they are accused of hiding something. If they ask for space, they are cold. If they stay close, they are too needy. The victim begins to feel there is no safe way to exist around the person creating the trap. The darker side of the double bind trap is that it slowly teaches helplessness. The victim may stop trusting their own decisions because every decision seems to create conflict. They may become anxious, overly careful, or emotionally frozen, trying to predict which choice will hurt less. This trick becomes powerful because the manipulator controls the meaning of both options. They can punish action and punish inaction. They can demand honesty, then attack the truth. They can demand closeness, then shame the need for connection. What makes the double bind trap creepy is how invisible the cage can be. No one has to say, "You cannot win." The person simply learns it through repeated emotional punishment. Over time, they may stop choosing freely and start choosing only what might cause the least damage, even when every path still leads back to blame. The emotional blackmail pattern. The emotional blackmail pattern is one of the most controlling psychological tricks because it uses love, fear, guilt, or obligation to force someone into surrender. At its core, it is the act of making a person feel that if they do not comply, something painful will happen emotionally. They may lose affection, create disappointment, cause anger, or become responsible for someone else's suffering. This trick works because people do not want to hurt those they care about. When someone says, "If you really loved me, you would do this," or "I do not know what I will do if you leave," the listener may feel trapped between their own boundary and another person's emotional reaction. The request stops feeling like a request. It becomes a test of loyalty, compassion, and character. The darker side of the emotional blackmail pattern is that it makes freedom feel cruel. A person may want to say no, walk away, disagree, or protect their peace, but the manipulator attaches emotional consequences to that choice. Suddenly, self-protection feels like abandonment. Honesty feels like betrayal. Distance feels like punishment. This trick becomes powerful because it uses the victim's conscience against them. The more caring they are, the easier it becomes to pressure them. They may sacrifice comfort, truth, time, money, or dignity just to avoid feeling responsible for someone else's pain. What makes the emotional blackmail pattern creepy is how deeply it can confuse love with control. The victim may think they are being kind, but slowly, they are being taught that their freedom must be paid for with guilt. The intermittent reward cycle. The intermittent reward cycle is one of the most addictive psychological tricks because it makes kindness unpredictable. At its core, it is the act of giving someone affection, attention, approval, or emotional relief at random moments, so they never know when the next reward will come, but they keep hoping it will. This trick works because the human mind becomes more attached to rewards that are inconsistent. If someone is always kind, the relationship feels stable. If someone is always cold, the person may eventually leave. But when someone switches between distance and warmth, silence and affection, rejection and praise, the mind starts chasing the next good moment. The uncertainty becomes the hook. The darker side of the intermittent reward cycle is that it can make pain feel connected to love. A victim may suffer through coldness, confusion, criticism, or neglect because they remember the moments when the person became sweet again. That small return of warmth feels powerful because it arrives after emotional hunger. This trick becomes dangerous because it trains the nervous system to wait. The person may stop asking whether the relationship is healthy and start asking when the good version will come back. They may accept long periods of hurt because the reward, when it appears, feels like proof that hope is not dead. What makes the intermittent reward cycle creepy is how deeply it can attach someone to inconsistency. The victim is not only craving the person, they are craving relief from the pain the person creates, mistaking the return of comfort for love when it may only be the next turn of the cycle. The trauma bonding loop. The trauma bonding loop is one of the most painful psychological patterns because it makes a person feel attached to the same source of their emotional suffering. At its core, it is the cycle of fear, pain, confusion, apology, relief, and affection that keeps someone emotionally tied to a person who repeatedly hurts them and then gives just enough comfort to make leaving feel impossible. This pattern works because the mind becomes deeply affected by contrast. When someone causes distress, then suddenly becomes gentle, sorry, loving, or protective, the relief feels powerful. The victim may think they do care, or maybe things are finally changing. But often, the comfort does not end the cycle, it only resets it. The darker side of the trauma bonding loop is that pain and love begin to feel connected. The victim may stop trusting peace because chaos has become familiar. They may defend the person who hurt them, hide the truth from others, or blame themselves for triggering the bad moments. The relationship becomes confusing because the same person who causes fear also becomes the person they run to for comfort. This pattern becomes powerful because hope keeps returning. After every painful episode, a soft moment appears. A promise is made. A memory of the good version comes back. The victim stays, not because they are weak, but because their emotions have been trained to wait for relief. What makes the trauma bonding loop creepy is how deeply it can trap the heart. The person may know they are hurting, yet still feel pulled back because the bond is no longer built on safety. It is built on survival, fear, and the desperate hope that love will finally stop hurting. The fear-obligation-guilt trap. The fear-obligation-guilt trap is one of the most controlling psychological patterns because it traps a person inside three emotional prisons at once. At its core, it is the act of using fear, duty, and guilt together, so someone feels unable to say no, walk away, disagree, or choose themselves without feeling like something terrible will follow. This trap works because each emotion attacks a different part of the mind. Fear whispers, "If I resist, I may lose them, anger them, or make things worse." Obligation says, "After everything that has happened, I should stay, help, forgive, or sacrifice." Guilt adds, "If I choose myself, I am selfish, cruel, or ungrateful." Together, they create a cage that feels emotional, moral, and dangerous all at once. The darker side of the fear-obligation-guilt trap is that it can make someone confuse pressure with responsibility. A manipulator may say, "I need you, you owe me," or "I thought you cared," until the victim feels responsible for keeping the other person calm, satisfied, and emotionally safe. This trap becomes powerful because it punishes independence before independence even happens. The victim may imagine the anger, sadness, disappointment, or rejection that will come if they choose differently, so they surrender early just to avoid the emotional cost. What makes the fear-obligation-guilt trap creepy is how deeply it can silence a person's own needs. They may still have choices, but every choice feels poisoned because fear warns them, obligation pulls them, and guilt punishes them for wanting freedom. Over time, they stop asking what is right for them and start asking what will hurt someone else the least. The silent treatment control. The silent treatment control is one of the most painful psychological tricks because it turns silence into punishment. At its core, it is the act of refusing to speak, respond, explain, or emotionally engage in order to make another person feel anxious, guilty, rejected, or desperate to fix the situation. This trick works because silence creates emotional emptiness. When someone suddenly stops replying, avoids eye contact, ignores questions, or acts like the other person does not exist, the mind begins to panic. The victim starts replaying everything they said, searching for the mistake, wondering what they did wrong, and trying to guess what will make the silence end. The darker side of the silent treatment control is that it can make someone surrender without a real conversation. They may apologize even when they do not understand the problem. They may abandon a boundary, take blame, soften their anger, or beg for communication just to stop the emotional freezing. The silence becomes louder than words because it makes connection feel conditional. This trick becomes powerful because it is easy to deny. The manipulator can say, "I just needed space," or "I did not want to argue," even when the silence was used to hurt, punish, or control. That makes the victim question whether their pain is valid. What makes the silent treatment control creepy is how invisible the damage can look. No shouting happens, no insult is spoken. But the person receiving it can feel abandoned, erased, and emotionally starved, waiting for one response that proves they still matter. The devaluation cycle. The devaluation cycle is one of the most emotionally destructive psychological tricks because it takes someone from feeling special to feeling worthless. At its core, it is the act of first lifting a person up with attention, praise, affection, or admiration, then slowly tearing down the same qualities that were once celebrated. This trick works because the beginning creates emotional attachment. When someone first makes you feel chosen, understood, attractive, important, or different from everyone else, your mind stores that version of the relationship as proof of what is possible. Then, when criticism begins, you do not immediately leave. You start trying to return to the way things were before. The darker side of the devaluation cycle is that it makes someone chase the approval they once received freely. The manipulator may begin pointing out flaws, comparing them to others, mocking their emotions, withdrawing affection, or acting disappointed. The victim may become more careful, more apologetic, more eager to please, and more willing to change just to recover the old warmth. This trick becomes powerful because the victim keeps remembering the beginning. They may think, "They used to adore me," or "Maybe I ruined it." Instead of seeing the pattern, they blame themselves for the loss of affection. What makes the devaluation cycle creepy is how slowly it can break someone's self-worth. The person who once made them feel rare becomes the same person making them feel replaceable. Over time, They stop asking why love turned into criticism and start believing they must become better, quieter, smaller, or easier to love before they deserve warmth again. The love bombing switch. The love bombing switch is one of the most emotionally dangerous psychological tricks because it begins with overwhelming affection and ends with control. At its core, it is the act of flooding someone with praise, attention, promises, messages, gifts, intimacy, or emotional intensity so they feel chosen quickly, then suddenly changing the rhythm once attachment has formed. This trick works because intense affection can feel like proof of destiny. When someone constantly says, "You are different, I have never felt this way," or "You are everything I needed," the listener may feel swept into something rare. The speed feels exciting. The attention feels healing. The person may believe they have finally found someone who sees them completely. The darker side of the love bombing switch is that the affection often changes after trust is secured. The same person who once gave constant warmth may become distant, critical, unpredictable, or controlling. The victim begins chasing the beginning, trying to bring back the version that made them feel special. This trick becomes powerful because the early intensity becomes emotional evidence. The victim may think, "They cannot be bad because they loved me so much at first," but the beginning may have been designed to create attachment before caution could speak. What makes the love bombing switch creepy is how beautiful the trap can feel at first. It does not arrive like danger. It arrives like attention, romance, loyalty, and rescue. Then, once the heart is open, the switch happens, and the person begins mistaking emotional withdrawal for something they must work harder to fix. The social isolation trick. The social isolation trick is one of the most dangerous psychological tricks because it slowly removes the voices that could help someone see clearly. At its core, it is the act of separating a person from friends, family, support systems, mentors, or anyone who might challenge the manipulator's influence. This trick works because isolation rarely begins with force. It often begins with concern, jealousy, criticism, or quiet suspicion. A manipulator may say, "They do not really care about you," or "Your family is always trying to control you." At first, it may sound protective, but little by little, the victim begins questioning the people who once made them feel grounded. The darker side of the social isolation trick is that it makes the manipulator's voice become the loudest voice in the victim's life. Without outside perspective, unhealthy behavior starts to feel normal. The victim may stop sharing details with others, not because they want secrecy, but because they have been taught that nobody else will understand. This trick becomes powerful because loneliness increases dependence. Once a person feels alone, the manipulator can become the source of comfort, advice, approval, and emotional survival. The fewer people around the victim, the easier it becomes to shape their reality. What makes the social isolation trick creepy is how quietly someone's world can shrink. No one may notice at first. Fewer calls, fewer visits, fewer honest conversations. Then one day, the victim realizes that the person who claimed to protect them has become the only person left close enough to control them. The threatened abandonment trap. The threatened abandonment trap is one of the most emotionally frightening psychological tricks because it uses the fear of being left to control behavior. At its core, it is the act of making someone feel that love, friendship, attention, or emotional connection will disappear if they do not obey, apologize, agree, or become easier to manage. This trick works because abandonment fear reaches deep into the human heart. When someone says, "Maybe I should just leave," or "You are making it hard for me to stay," the listener may feel panic before they can think clearly. The threat does not have to be loud. Sometimes it is hidden in distance, coldness, delayed replies, or sudden emotional withdrawal. The darker side of the threatened abandonment trap is that it can make someone sacrifice their own needs to keep another person close. They may stop speaking honestly, stop setting boundaries, accept blame too quickly, or tolerate behavior that hurts them because the fear of losing the person feels worse than the pain of staying. This trick becomes powerful because it turns connection into a condition. The victim begins learning that love remains only when they behave correctly. Peace feels temporary. Closeness feels fragile. Every disagreement begins to feel like a doorway someone might walk out of. What makes the threatened abandonment trap creepy is how deeply it can train someone to betray themselves. They may think they are protecting the relationship, but slowly, they are protecting themselves from the terror of being left, even if staying means becoming smaller, quieter, and more afraid to be real. The learned helplessness pattern. The learned helplessness pattern is one of the most heartbreaking psychological tricks because it makes a person stop believing their actions can change anything. At its core, it is the act of exposing someone to repeated failure, rejection, blame, confusion, or punishment until they begin to feel that trying is pointless. This pattern works because the human mind learns from outcomes. If someone speaks up and gets ignored, sets a boundary and gets punished, explains themselves and gets twisted, or tries to leave and gets pulled back into guilt, their confidence begins to weaken. After enough failed attempts, the person may stop fighting, not because they agree, but because they no longer believe resistance will help. The darker side of the learned helplessness pattern is that it can make captivity feel normal. The victim may stop asking for better treatment. They may stop expecting honesty, respect, kindness, or change. They may begin saying, "This is just how things are," or "Nothing I do matters," while slowly surrendering parts of themselves they once protected. This trick becomes powerful because hopelessness is easier to control than anger. An angry person may still fight. A hopeful person may still leave. But a helpless person may stay because they believe every door leads back to the same pain. What makes the learned helplessness pattern creepy is how quietly it breaks the will. No chain is needed when someone has been taught that movement changes nothing. Over time, they may stop looking for escape, not because there is no way out, but because someone convinced them they would fail before they even tried. The total reality control effect. The total reality control effect is one of the darkest psychological tricks because it does not only influence what someone feels, it tries to control what they believe is real. At its core, it is the act of slowly shaping a person's memories, emotions, choices, relationships, and self-perception until they begin depending on one person to tell them what is true. This effect works because reality is not only built from facts, it is built from repetition, trust, fear, emotion, and the people around us. When someone repeatedly says, "That did not happen," "Nobody else thinks that," "You are too sensitive," or "I am the only one who understands you," the victim may begin losing confidence in their own mind. Their inner voice becomes weaker while the manipulator's voice becomes louder. The darker side of total reality control is that it can make a person feel trapped inside someone else's version of life. Friends become enemies. Boundaries become betrayal. Pain becomes overreaction. Control becomes love. The victim may stop asking what they feel and start asking what they are allowed to feel. This trick becomes powerful because it attacks every exit. If the victim trusts their memory, it is challenged. If they seek help, others are discredited. If they resist, they are called unstable. If they stay quiet, the false reality grows stronger. What makes the total reality control effect creepy is how complete it can become. The person may still be walking freely, speaking normally, and living publicly, yet inside, their reality has been slowly rewritten by someone who taught them to doubt everything except the control itself. The emotional ownership effect. The emotional ownership effect is one of the most controlling psychological tricks because it makes someone feel that their feelings belong to another person. At its core, it is the act of making someone believe they are responsible for your mood, your peace, your anger, your sadness, or your emotional stability until they begin managing themselves around your reactions. This trick works because caring people naturally notice how their actions affect others. If someone becomes cold, wounded, angry, or withdrawn every time you make an independent choice, your mind begins connecting freedom with harm. You start asking, "Will this upset them?" before asking, "Is this right for me?" Their emotions become the first thing you consider. The darker side of the emotional ownership effect is that it can make someone feel guilty for having a separate life. A manipulator may act as if your boundaries are personal attacks, your silence is rejection, your happiness without them is betrayal, and your independence is proof that you do not care. Slowly, your emotional space shrinks. This trick becomes powerful because it turns love into responsibility. The victim may begin believing that keeping the other person calm is part of being loyal, kind, or good. They may stop sharing honest thoughts because honesty might disturb the mood. What makes the emotional ownership effect creepy is how invisible the control can be. No rule may be spoken, no command may be given, but the victim begins living as if another person's emotional weather is their duty to control, and their own peace becomes something they are allowed to have only when someone else permits it. The reality permission trick. The reality permission trick is one of the most disturbing psychological tricks because it makes someone feel they need approval before trusting what they already know. At its core, it is the act of making a person doubt their feelings, memories, instincts, or observations until they begin waiting for someone else to confirm whether their reality is valid. This trick works because people naturally seek reassurance when they feel confused. If someone repeatedly challenges your perception, minimizes your pain, or acts as if your reaction is unreasonable, you may begin looking outside yourself for certainty. You start asking, was that really wrong? Did that actually hurt? Am I allowed to feel this way? The darker side of the reality permission trick is that it weakens inner authority. The victim may stop trusting their first reaction. They may need proof before naming disrespect, permission before setting boundaries, or validation before believing their own discomfort. Their instincts become quiet because they have been trained to wait for external approval. This trick becomes powerful because the manipulator becomes the gatekeeper of truth. If they say something was harmless, the victim may try to believe it. If they say the victim is overreacting, the victim may shrink their pain. Reality no longer feels personal, it feels supervised. What makes the reality permission trick creepy is how deeply it can disconnect someone from themselves. The person may still feel the wound, but they hesitate to call it pain. They may still see the pattern, but they hesitate to trust it. Slowly, they stop living from what they know and start waiting for someone else to allow them to know it. The ambiguity trap. The ambiguity trap is one of the most unsettling psychological tricks because it does not attack the mind directly. It surrounds the mind with unanswered questions. At its core, it is the act of giving someone a vague statement, unclear warning, or unfinished hint that makes them feel something is wrong without telling them exactly what it is. The person is left standing in emotional darkness, trying to guess what they did, who is talking, or what danger is coming. This is why ambiguity can feel more disturbing than a direct accusation. A clear accusation gives the brain something to defend against, but a sentence like, "You should know what you did," or "People are beginning to notice," creates pressure without evidence. The mind starts searching for hidden meaning. It replays old conversations, small mistakes, awkward moments, and private fears, trying to solve a puzzle that may not even exist. The creepy power of the ambiguity trap is that it makes the victim punish themselves. They become careful, anxious, apologetic, and emotionally dependent on the person who created the confusion. Instead of demanding clarity, they may chase approval, hoping the silence will end. Manipulators use this trick because uncertainty gives them control without responsibility. They can deny everything later and say, "I never accused you." Yet the damage has already started inside the other person's mind. What makes this trick truly dark is how quietly it works. No shouting, no proof, no clear threat. Just a few vague words placed in the right emotional moment can make someone feel guilty, watched, and unsafe, even when nothing wrong has actually happened. The delayed warmth trick. The delayed warmth trick is one of the most emotionally confusing psychological patterns because it gives kindness late, not freely. At its core, it is the act of withholding warmth, attention, or approval until the other person has already started feeling uncertain. Then, suddenly, a smile appears, a message arrives, a compliment is given. Because warmth comes after discomfort, it feels stronger than kindness. This trick works because the human mind is sensitive to emotional relief. When someone first makes you feel ignored, unsure, or slightly rejected, your nervous system begins searching for safety. You wonder if you said something wrong. You replay your last message. You become alert to every small change in tone. Then, when the person finally becomes warm again, the relief can feel almost addictive. The darker side of delayed warmth is that it trains people to crave approval from the person who keeps removing it. Instead of noticing the pattern, they focus on winning back the good version of that person. They may become more careful, more available, more apologetic, or more eager to please. Manipulators use this because inconsistent kindness creates emotional dependence. If someone is always kind, you relax. If someone is always cold, you leave. But when warmth appears only after uncertainty, the mind starts chasing it like a reward. What makes the delayed warmth trick creepy is that the affection may not be real connection. It can become a leash made of timing. The person does not need to threaten you. They only need to make kindness feel scarce, and suddenly their attention begins to feel like something you must earn. The confusion loop. The confusion loop is one of the most mentally draining psychological tricks because it traps a person inside uncertainty that keeps repeating. At its core, it is the act of creating unclear explanations, mixed signals, changing stories, or emotional contradictions until the other person no longer trusts their judgment. Instead of walking away with clarity, they keep returning to the same question. What just happened? This trick works because the human mind tries to complete unfinished patterns. When someone says one thing today and another tomorrow, acts warm in one moment and distant in the next, or gives an explanation that almost makes sense but still feels wrong, the brain keeps searching for order. The person begins replaying conversations, comparing details, and trying to make the pieces fit. The darker side of the confusion loop is that it shifts attention away from the manipulator's behavior and onto the victim's own doubt. The person may start asking, "Am I overreacting? Did I misunderstand? Maybe I am the problem." This is where the trap becomes powerful, because confusion can make people easier to influence than fear. Manipulators rely on this because a confused person is less likely to confront clearly. They may accept weak explanations, tolerate repeated disrespect, or stay in situations they would have left if everything were obvious. What makes the confusion loop creepy is that it does not always feel like control at first. It can feel like trying to understand someone complicated. But over time, the mind becomes tired, the emotions become tangled, and clarity starts feeling like something only the other person can give. The half-truth anchor. The half-truth anchor is one of the most dangerous psychological tricks because it hides deception inside something that sounds real. At its core, it is the act of giving someone a piece of truth, then attaching a false meaning to it. Because part of the statement is accurate, the whole thing begins to feel believable, even when the conclusion is twisted. This trick works because the mind naturally relaxes when it recognizes truth. If someone says something you know is correct, your defenses drop for a moment. Then they add another claim beside it. And because both ideas are connected in the same sentence, your brain may start treating them as equally trustworthy. The truth becomes the anchor, and the lie quietly attaches itself to it. The darker side of the half-truth anchor is that it can make people doubt their own memory. A manipulator may say, "Yes, I was upset, but only because you embarrassed me." The first part may be true. They were upset, but the second part shifts blame and creates guilt. Suddenly, the victim is no longer focused on the behavior. They are defending themselves against the false meaning attached to it. This trick is powerful because it feels harder to challenge than a complete lie. If you reject it, the person can point to the true part and say, "So you are denying that happened." This makes the victim feel trapped between admitting reality and accepting distortion. What makes the half-truth anchor creepy is how quietly it rewrites emotional history. One small truth can become a hook, and once the mind grabs it, the lie begins to sink deeper. The false familiarity effect. The false familiarity effect is one of the most unsettling psychological tricks because it makes a stranger feel closer than they really are. At its core, it is the act of creating an artificial sense of connection by copying someone's interests, language, habits, values, or emotional wounds until they begin to feel strangely understood. The person does not build trust slowly. They manufacture it quickly. This trick works because humans are naturally drawn to people who feel familiar. When someone says, "I am exactly like that too," or "I have always felt the same way," the mind lowers its guard. Similarity feels safe. It makes the other person seem less like a stranger and more like someone who belongs in your private world. The darker side of the false familiarity effect is that it can bypass caution. A manipulator may learn small details about someone, then reflect them back in a way that feels personal. They may pretend to share the same past, the same fears, the same dreams, or the same dislikes. The victim starts thinking, "This person gets me," even though the connection may be carefully performed. This trick becomes powerful because loneliness makes familiarity feel like rescue. When someone appears to understand the parts of you that others ignored, you may reveal more, trust faster, and question less. What makes the false familiarity effect creepy is that the closeness may not be real. It can be a costume made from your own personality. The person studies what makes you feel seen, then wears it back to you until their presence feels like destiny instead of strategy. The emotional debt trick. The emotional debt trick is one of the most uncomfortable psychological tricks because it turns kindness into a silent contract. At its core, it is the act of doing something helpful, generous, or emotionally supportive, then making the other person feel they now owe loyalty, attention, forgiveness, or obedience in return. What looked like care slowly becomes pressure. This trick works because human beings are wired to respond to favors. When someone helps us, listens to us, protects us, or shows up during a hard moment, we naturally feel grateful. That gratitude is healthy when the kindness is genuine, but when it is used as leverage, gratitude becomes a chain. The person may feel guilty for saying no, setting boundaries, or questioning the one who once helped them. The darker side of the emotional debt trick is that it can make people stay in situations that hurt them. A manipulator may remind them of past sacrifices, old favors, private support, or emotional rescue. They may say, "After everything I did for you," not to express pain, but to make freedom feel selfish. This trick becomes powerful because it attacks a person's conscience. The victim may begin to confuse appreciation with obligation. They may tolerate disrespect because they remember the good moments. They may silence their discomfort because leaving feels like betrayal. What makes the emotional debt trick creepy is that it hides control inside kindness. The gift is not always a gift. The comfort is not always comfort. Sometimes what felt like rescue was only the beginning of a debt someone planned to collect later. The selective memory trick. The selective memory trick is one of the most disturbing psychological tricks because it makes the past feel unstable. At its core, it is the act of remembering only the parts of an event that benefit one person while ignoring, minimizing, or denying the parts that expose their behavior. The conversation does not disappear completely, it gets edited. This trick works because memory is emotional, not perfect. When someone speaks with confidence about what happened, the other person may begin to question their own version. A manipulator may remember the insult they received, but forget the insult they gave first. They may remember your reaction, but erase the pressure that caused it. They may remember their kindness, but forget the control attached to it. The darker side of the selective memory trick is that it forces the victim into constant defense. Instead of discussing the full truth, they are pulled into proving details, correcting timelines, and explaining context. Over time, this becomes exhausting. The person may start giving up, not because the manipulator is right, but because fighting for reality becomes too tiring. This trick becomes powerful because it turns memory into a weapon. The manipulator does not need to deny everything. They only need to choose what counts. By highlighting one part and burying another, they can make themselves look innocent and the other person look unstable. What makes the selective memory trick creepy is how quietly it rewrites emotional history. The victim may know something is missing, but still struggle to prove it. Little by little, they stop trusting their own memory and start accepting the version that hurts them less to argue against. The controlled silence effect. The controlled silence effect is one of the most painful psychological tricks because it uses absence as pressure. At its core, it is the act of becoming silent on purpose, not to calm down or reflect, but to make another person feel anxious, guilty, rejected, or desperate for a response. The silence becomes a message, even though no words are spoken. This trick works because humans are wired to seek connection. When someone suddenly stops replying, avoids eye contact, withdraws affection, or refuses to explain what is wrong, the other person's mind starts filling the empty space. They wonder what they did. They replay conversations. They search for hidden mistakes. The silence begins to feel louder than an argument. The darker side of the controlled silence effect is that it can make people chase clarity from the same person who is withholding it. Instead of focusing on whether the silence is fair, they focus on ending it. They may apologize too quickly, soften their boundaries, or accept blame just to restore emotional contact. This trick becomes powerful because silence can look harmless from the outside. The manipulator can say, "I just needed space," even when the real purpose was punishment. That makes the victim feel confused for being hurt by something that seems invisible. What makes the controlled silence effect creepy is how deeply it can unsettle someone without leaving evidence. No insults are spoken, no threats are made, no obvious attack happens. Yet the person on the receiving end can feel abandoned, watched, and emotionally trapped, waiting for one message, one glance, or one small sign that they are safe again. The unfinished sentence trick. The unfinished sentence trick is one of the most disturbing psychological tricks because it lets the listener create the fear for themselves. At its core, it is the act of beginning a thought, warning, accusation, or emotional statement, then stopping before the meaning is complete. The person hearing it is left suspended in uncertainty, trying to finish the sentence with their own imagination. This trick works because the human mind hates emotional gaps. When someone says, "I was going to tell you, but never mind," or "if only you knew what people were saying," the brain does not simply ignore it. It starts searching for the missing ending. It pulls from insecurity, memory, guilt, and fear, trying to complete what was deliberately left open. The darker side of the unfinished sentence trick is that the victim may become more affected by what was not said than by what was said. A direct insult can be challenged, a clear accusation can be answered, but an unfinished sentence floats in the mind like a shadow. It cannot be proven wrong because it was never fully spoken. This trick becomes powerful because it gives the speaker control without accountability. They can create anxiety, then retreat by saying, "I did not say anything." Meanwhile, the other person is already unsettled, already guessing, already trying to earn the truth. What makes the unfinished sentence trick creepy is how little it takes to disturb someone's peace. A pause, a sigh, a sudden change of tone, or a sentence abandoned halfway can make the mind run into dark places on its own.